Hello, my sleepy heads. It's good to have you back on History for Sleep. In the following minutes, you will experience a deep state of relaxation. This story helps you to easily sleep through the night, so you can get up energized in the morning. Not only will you fall asleep faster, you will also get rid of disturbing thoughts. Listen to these history stories for at least 10 days for the best results. The longer you listen to the video, the more likely you'll experience persistent and positive changes in the way you sleep. I wish you a great rest, and if you haven't already, we'd be very happy if you consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss any new calming and relaxing history story. Tonight, we're going to drift gently into the world of ancient Greece, where legends were carried on the tides and heroes wandered beneath starlit skies. The Odyssey, a tale born from the voice of Homer, is not just a story of war and wandering, but of longing, patience, and the slow passage of time across endless seas. For the next couple of hours, we'll follow Odysseus, the clever king of Ithaca, as he sails through calm waters and restless shores, guided by gods, challenged by fate, and carried ever closer to home. Along the way, we'll move softly through his encounters, the whispers of the Sirens, the halls of Circe, the caves of giants, and the still nights where only the stars kept watch. But before you get comfortable and let your mind drift into this ancient world, I'd love it if you could take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if these calm stories of the past bring you peace. Your support truly helps me grow and keep making these calm journey through time just for you. And in the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always so wonderful to see our little community listening together from all corners of the world, quietly sharing these stories across space and time. So, settle in, dim the light, maybe turn on the fan, take a slow breath, and let us step softly into the land of the Odyssey. Now let's begin. The Great War of Troy had finally ended, its fires smoldering into ash and silence. After 10 long years of fighting, the weary Greeks packed their ships, their eyes heavy with the memories of countless battles and fallen friends. Among them was Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, whose mind had helped bring about the fall of Troy through the trick of the wooden horse. Yet though the city was conquered, and though the spoils of victory lay ready to be carried home, the journey itself would prove to be the true test of his endurance. For while the warriors longed for hearth and family, the gods were not finished with them. Above the calm surface of the sea, the divine eyes of Poseidon, god of earthquakes and oceans, washed with cold anger. Troy might have burned, but Odysseus would not find an easy path back to Ithaca. He was a man marked, a wanderer whose sails would be tossed and broken again and again. And so, as Odysseus and his men prepared their vessels and set their gaze upon the horizon, the quiet hum of fate began to weave around them. The sea, which seemed gentle in the soft glow of dawn, held within it the promise of storms. The oars dipped into the water, steady at first, each stroke carrying them farther from Troy, but also closer to the curse that would define their voyage. This was not the beginning of peace, but the unfolding of a story where home was always just out of reach. On the deck of his ship, Odysseus stood with the wind brushing against his face, breathing in the salty air of freedom. He had endured 10 years of brutal combat, endless nights of strategy, and the loss of countless companions. His heart should have been light, yet there was a weight he could not shake. The Greeks had committed many acts in Troy's final days, acts of plunder, desecration, and cruelty in the heat of victory. The gods, who watched closely over mortal deeds, had not remained silent. Some warriors had angered Athena, others offended Apollo, and still more brought wrath upon themselves by breaking the sacred laws of the divine. But for Odysseus, it was Poseidon's fury that would prove most relentless. The reason was not entirely the war itself, but the man who had blinded the Cyclops, Poseidon's son, in an act of desperate escape that would soon come to define his fate. For now, however, Odysseus could only think of Ithaca, the rolling hills of his homeland, and the tender face of Penelope waiting for his return. The sea stretched endlessly before him, shimmering under the morning light. His men laughed, drank, and sang songs of their return. But beneath it all, there was a sense of unease, as though the air itself carried whispers of what was to come. Odysseus knew the gods could be fickle, but he did not yet grasp the depth of Poseidon's grudge. Soon, however, the ocean would teach him in waves and storms, each one a reminder of divine displeasure. The ships glided away from the coast, their sails swelling with a gentle breeze, and for a time the voyage seemed promising. The men found comfort in the rhythm of the sea, the rocking of the wooden hull beneath their feet, and the horizon that seemed to invite them home. Odysseus allowed himself a moment of quiet hope, imagining the reunion with his wife and son, who must by now be growing into a young man without the guiding hand of his father. But the gods are not swift in their punishments. They often wait until mortals grow comfortable, until the illusion of safety has settled in, before unleashing their trials. And so, the first days at sea passed without hardship, as if the world itself wished to lull the weary soldiers into a dream of homecoming. The waves were calm, the stars bright, and even the storms seemed to avoid their course. Yet above, Poseidon waited with patience, like a predator watching from the shadows. He was the god of deep waters, of sudden floods and shifting tides, and to him, Odysseus was not merely a mortal king, but an offense to his bloodline. For Odysseus had scarred his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and in doing so had drawn the hatred of the sea itself. The curse was not yet spoken, but it hovered like a storm on the horizon, unseen yet inevitable. The men slept easily on deck, unaware that each mile carried them not closer to Ithaca, but deeper into the snares of fate. Odysseus knew well that the sea was a realm of shifting moods, and though he had always been a man of cleverness rather than brute force, wood alone could not tame the ocean. The men rowed with confidence, their chants rising with each stroke, their songs weaving through the morning air. They believed their troubles were behind them, that Troy's fire was the last great trial of their lives. Yet, in the distance, gulls wheeled and cried with a warning tone, as though even the birds sensed a restlessness beneath the surface of the waves. In the minds of sailors, every sign could be a message from the gods. Every change in wind, every flicker of lightning on the horizon. For Odysseus, whose heart carried both pride and caution, these subtle omens lingered. He remembered the stories told by elders of how the gods punished arrogance and forgot no insult. His own trickery had been praised among men, but would the immortals see it differently? Still, he kept his worries to himself, unwilling to dampen the joy of his weary crew. They had lost so much in Troy, brothers, sons, and comrades who would never again see their homes. Let them celebrate while the seas remained calm. In the stillness of the night, however, as Odysseus lay awake beneath the stars, he felt the silence of the deep press against him. It was a silence not of peace, but of waiting, as though the very ocean held its breath before a storm. The curse of Poseidon began, not with thunder or a raging storm, but with the slow, creeping hand of misfortune. As the ships sailed farther from Troy, small troubles began to gather like shadows. Supplies spoiled more quickly than expected, water casks leaked, and winds that once carried them swiftly forward grew erratic, shifting without reason. The men muttered quietly, their laughter fading into uneasy silence. Sailors, especially those seasoned by long years of war and wandering, knew that chance was rarely to blame. The gods, they whispered, were stirring against them. Odysseus tried to ease their fears, reminding them of their victories, urging them to hold faith in their return. His words were steady, his voice calm, but in his own heart he sensed the weight of divine interference. He had seen how swiftly fortunes changed in Troy when a single god turned the tide of battle with invisible hands. To cross the seas without their favor was to drift into endless peril. Still, he set his jaw against despair. A leader could not falter before his men, and Odysseus had long mastered the art of wearing courage as a shield. Yet courage alone could not appease Poseidon. Far below the shifting waters, the god of the sea was already weaving storms, summoning waves, and plotting delays that would carry Odysseus far from Ithaca's shores. For every smile Odysseus gave his men, the gods prepared another trial, ensuring that the journey home would be remembered not for joy, but for endless struggle. The first true storm came suddenly, as storms often do, rising from the horizon with a speed that mocked the sailors' preparations. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, blotting out the sun until day was swallowed by a shadowed gloom. The men scrambled to secure the sails, to lash down cargo, and to brace themselves against the fury of the wind. The sea, once gentle, rose in towering walls of water, crashing against the wooden hulls with a force that splintered timbers, and sent men sprawling across the decks. Lightning split the heavens, its light reflecting in brief flashes across terrified faces. Amid the chaos, Odysseus stood firm, calling out commands, steadying his crew with the strength of his voice. Yet even he knew this storm was no natural thing. It bore the hand of Poseidon, each wave striking like a god's anger, each gust of wind like a curse carried upon the air. The ships scattered, some driven far apart, others lost in the churning sea. Men cried out to Zeus, to Athena, to any god who might spare them, but the storm raged on without mercy. Hours bled into a night of terror, until finally, with the pale light of dawn, the fury began to ebb. The survivors clung to their vessels, battered but alive. The sea calmed, but the damage was done. They were far from their intended course, lost among unfamiliar waters, and though the storm had passed, its message lingered clear. Poseidon had claimed their voyage as his own. When the seas at last grew calm, the men looked about them in silence, their spirits weighed down not only by exhaustion, but by the knowledge that the gods themselves stood against them. Odysseus walked the length of his ship, his eyes resting on each weary face, reading in them the same question he dared not answer aloud. How long would they wander? Ithaca seemed farther away than ever, a dream slipping out of reach with each passing day. Yet Odysseus would not let despair root itself among his men. He spoke of patience, of endurance, of how even the gods might be swayed by persistence and sacrifice. His words were gentle, meant to calm, though deep within he knew that Poseidon's hatred was not a fleeting thing. For gods do not forget, and their grudges stretch across the years like the unbroken horizon of the sea. Still, Odysseus found solace in the stars above. At night, when the waves rocked the ship into uneasy sleep, he studied the constellations, guiding his course by their steady light. Each star was a reminder that though the sea was vast, it was not endless. Though Poseidon raged, other gods still watched, perhaps with kinder eyes. And so he pressed onward, whispering promises to the night, promises that he would see Ithaca again, that he would hold Penelope once more, and that no storm, no curse, no god, however mighty, could sever the bond between a man and his home. Yet the trials were only beginning. Hunger crept among the men as supplies dwindled, forcing them to make landfall upon strange and unwelcoming shores. Each island brought with it new dangers, some hidden, some obvious. They encountered peoples who were hostile, lands where the very air seemed thick with enchantment, and beasts that belonged more to myth than to the waking world. For Odysseus, every step forward was a negotiation between survival and peril. His cleverness, so prized in Troy, became the only shield against the endless challenges of their wandering. And yet, despite his cunning, there were times when his men's weakness brought ruin, times when greed, impatience, or disobedience invited disaster. Odysseus watched as the curse of Poseidon worked not only through storms, but through the flaws of mortal hearts. It was a cruel truth that even among comrades, the seeds of destruction could take root. He mourned each loss, each companion carried away by folly or by fate, but still he pressed on, driven by the image of Ithaca that burned within him. For all the world's dangers, none could quench his longing for home. And so, battered but unbroken, he steered his men back into the arms of the sea, knowing that the waters would never be kind, but refusing to surrender to despair. It is said that the sea holds a memory, that every wave carries the echoes of what has passed before. If that is true, then each swell that lifted Odysseus' ship bore with it the weight of Poseidon's anger, a reminder that the ocean itself was an enemy. The men learned to live with this uneasy truth, sleeping in shifts, keeping constant watch, and whispering prayers before each meal. Superstition became their comfort, rituals their fragile armor against the unknown. They poured small offerings into the sea, drops of wine, fragments of bread, hoping to soften the god's wrath. Yet the waves remained indifferent, lapping against the hull with steady rhythm, as though mocking their attempts at peace. Odysseus, though patient, knew that appeasement would not sway Poseidon. This was no quarrel that could be eased with sacrifice. It was a vendetta, born of blood and bound by pride. Still, he encouraged the offerings, if only to soothe his men's hearts. For in their belief lay a fragment of strength, and strength was needed for every passing day. As they drifted farther into uncharted waters, the men clung not only to their oars, but to hope itself, fragile though it was. Odysseus watched them closely, understanding that the true danger was not merely storms or monsters, but despair. To lose heart was to lose the battle before it began, and in the endless dance between man and God, the heart was the one weapon left in mortal hands. Nights upon the sea grew long, filled with the groaning of timbers and the sighing of wind through the sails. Sleep came lightly, often broken by the sudden slap of waves or the cry of a restless sailor. Yet within this exhaustion, there was also a strange calm, as though the rhythm of the sea lulled them into a dreamlike state. For Odysseus, such nights were times of reflection. He thought of the Trojan War, of the friends who had fallen, of Achilles and Hector, of the burning towers and the sound of battle fading into silence. He wondered if all their struggles had been worth it, if victory at Troy had been a blessing or merely the beginning of another, harsher war, a war not of men but of gods. He longed for the simplicity of Ithaca, for the sound of sheep upon the hillsides, for the laughter of his son echoing across the courtyard. These memories came to him like whispers, soothing yet painful, for they reminded him of how far he remained from home. Still, he did not allow grief to root itself in his heart. Each dawn brought another chance, another day of sailing, another step, however uncertain, toward Ithaca. And so, beneath the vast canopy of stars, Odysseus closed his eyes, trusting that even in Poseidon's ocean, the night would carry him one breath closer to his return. The curse of Poseidon was not only in the storms and detours, but in the constant sense of being watched. Odysseus often felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him, as though the sea itself studied his every move. A sudden shift in the current, an unexpected gust of wind, even the eerie stillness of a calm sea, all became signs of the god's presence. His men felt it too, and though they did not speak of it openly, their silence carried the same fear. It was as if they sailed not upon water, but upon the very will of Poseidon, who toyed with them as a child toys with drifting leaves. Yet Odysseus would not bow to this invisible gaze. He held his head high, steered his ship with steady hands, and carried himself with the dignity of a king. For if the god wished to break him, it would not be through fear. Instead, Odysseus answered each misfortune with endurance, each setback with determination. And though he knew the path would be long, he trusted that the same cleverness that had brought down the walls of Troy would guide him through the sea's endless trials. Poseidon might curse him, but Odysseus carried within him a strength that no storm could wash away, the unwavering will to return home. And so, the journey truly began, not as a swift voyage across calm waters, but as a trial without end, a wandering shaped by the hand of a god's vengeance. Odysseus and his men sailed onward, their fates bound to storms, strange lands, and the temptations that would rise before them. Each day carried them farther from Troy, but not always closer to Ithaca. Time blurred, seasons shifted, and still the sea held them captive, a stage upon which mortal endurance clashed with divine anger. Odysseus, ever watchful, knew now that his voyage was not a simple return but an Odyssey, one that would test not only his strength but his patience, his faith, and his very soul. He did not yet know of the many trials to come, the Lotus-Eaters, the Sirens, the witch Circe, or the dead who waited to speak with him in the Underworld. He knew only this, that Poseidon's curse was real, that the sea would never let him go easily, and that the longing for home would be both his torment and his strength. And so, with sails patched and hearts weary, the ships pressed onward into the vast unknown, while above, the gods watched, silent and watchful, as one man's fate unfolded upon the endless waters. After the storm that scattered Odysseus and his men, the sea carried them onward in silence. Days blurred into nights, and the horizon offered no familiar landmark. The men, weary and hollow with hunger, watched the waters with eyes that longed for land. At last, an island appeared in the distance, rising gently from the waves like a promise. Its shores were soft and welcoming, the air sweet with the scent of blossoms carried upon the breeze. Here, Odysseus thought, they might find food, shelter, and a brief respite from the endless struggle of the sea. The oars dipped eagerly, guiding the ship to shore. As they approached, the island revealed itself as a place of quiet beauty, with fields rolling into gentle hills and streams that glistened like silver beneath the sun. Birds called from the trees, and the grass swayed as though inviting the strangers to rest. It seemed untouched by war, untouched by hardship, a place apart from the world of men. Yet even in its stillness, the island held a secret, one that Odysseus could not yet see. For this was the land of the Lotus-Eaters, whose lives drifted in a haze of forgetfulness, their days slipping by like soft clouds across the sky. Odysseus' men, weary and tempted, would soon learn that not all dangers were the face of violence. Some dangers are sweet, gentle, and silent, soothing enough to make a man forget that he ever wished to go home at all. The people who dwelled upon the island welcomed Odysseus' men with kindness. They were not warriors, nor did they bear the scars of hardship. Their eyes were calm, their voices soft, and their hands carried offerings of strange fruit. It was unlike any fruit the Greeks had seen before, round, pale, and glistening with dew, with a fragrance that was both floral and honeyed. They called it the lotus, and they pressed it upon the weary sailors as though it were a gift of peace. The men, too tired to question, tasted it, and the sweetness dissolved upon their tongues like a dream. In that moment, the hardships of the sea slipped from their minds. The storms, the hunger, the fear, all melted away as though they had never been. They sat upon the grass, laughing softly, their eyes drifting toward the horizon not with longing, but with indifference. The lotus bore not the bite of poison, nor the weight of intoxication. It was something subtler, gentler, a forgetting. It lulled the heart into contentment, making the thought of Ithaca, of family, of home, feel distant and unnecessary. The island's people smiled knowingly, as if they had seen this many times before. They themselves had no desire for travel, no hunger for war or conquest, only the simple satisfaction of the lotus. And so Odysseus' men, one by one, began to sink into the same stillness, their purpose slipping like sand through open fingers. It was a danger far greater than any spear or storm, for it threatened to unmoor their very will. Odysseus, cautious by nature, did not taste the lotus at first. He watched instead, observing the change in his men. At first, it seemed harmless, their laughter light, their shoulders eased of burdens long carried. Yet as time passed, he noticed their eyes grow distant, unfocused, as though they stared not at the world before them, but at some soft vision only they could see. When he spoke of Ithaca, of Penelope, of the families awaiting their return, they merely smiled faintly, as if such words belonged to another life. His heart grew heavy with dread, for he saw what the fruit had done. It had stolen their longing. And without longing, there could be no homecoming. To endure hardship, a man must cling to the hope of what lies ahead. But with that hope dissolved, there was no reason to lift an oar, no reason to brave the sea. The island whispered a promise of peace, but it was a peace built upon forgetting, and Odysseus knew that forgetting was a kind of death. He saw in his men's faces the danger of surrender, of giving up the struggle for comfort that was both sweet and empty. And so, though his own heart longed for rest, he steeled himself against temptation. He would not taste the lotus, for he could not allow himself to forget Ithaca. His journey, though cursed, was not yet ended, and he would not abandon it for the illusion of contentment. The island seemed to breathe with serenity, its hills and meadows bathed in a golden haze that made time feel slow and unmeasured. Odysseus' men, freed from the burdens of memory, lay upon the grass as though it were a bed, their limbs heavy and their thoughts quiet. Some plucked more of the lotus fruit, their fingers sticky with its sweet juices, while others closed their eyes, smiling faintly as they drifted in half-dreams. The people of the island moved among them gently, speaking in voices like whispers of wind, assuring them that they need not hurry, need not worry. Here, they said, there was no war, no storm, no hunger. Here, a man could live in peace, cradled by forgetfulness. Odysseus, watching, felt the pull of this promise. How simple it would be to let go, to release the weight of years, of battles, of longing. To forget would mean freedom from suffering. Yet he also knew it would mean surrender, the loss of purpose, the abandonment of Ithaca, and all it meant. He thought of Penelope, weaving at her loom, faithful in her weight. He thought of Telemachus, his son, growing older each day without his father's guidance. To forget them would be to betray them. So he resisted, but the resistance was not easy. The air itself seemed laced with the lotus, carrying its sweetness into every breath. To stand firm against it was a trial as great as any storm Poseidon had sent upon the sea. As hours passed, Odysseus saw how deeply the lotus had ensnared his men. When he urged them to rise, to return to the ship, they shook their heads with gentle smiles, as though his words were the ramblings of a man clinging to a burden unnecessarily. Why return to hardship? Their eyes seemed to say. Why chase storms when peace lies here before us? The more they ate, the less they remembered, until some no longer spoke of Ithaca at all. They spoke instead of staying, of letting the sea go on without them, of building lives upon this quiet island where the days flowed like honey. Odysseus felt a growing desperation, for he knew that if they remained even a little longer, the desire to leave would vanish entirely. He thought of how easily men could be undone, not by the clash of swords, but by the gentle hand of forgetfulness. The danger was not in the fruit's taste, but in its erasure of longing. Without longing, there could be no struggle. Without struggle, there could be no return. Odysseus' voice grew sharper as he pleaded, then commanded, but the men laughed softly, as though his urgency were misplaced. Their eyes, heavy with contentment, seemed older and more distant, as though each bite of the lotus aged their memories and left them drifting farther from the shore of their true lives. Odysseus realized then that words would not save them. Persuasion, reason, and memory itself had been stripped from his men's hearts by the fruit. Action alone could restore their path, and so, with the strength of a leader burdened by duty, he resolved to force them back. It was no easy thing, for the men resisted, not with anger, but with the stubborn calm of those who believe they are safe. They clung to the grass, to the fruit, to the sweetness that had captured them, their voices pleading not to be torn away. Odysseus, though his heart ached at their sorrow, would not yield. He knew that to let them remain was to let them die in spirit, to abandon not only their homes, but their very selves. With firm hands he dragged them, one by one, from the fields, ignoring their protests and their tears. His other men, those who had resisted the fruit, helped him, and together they carried the lost ones back to the ship. The Lotus-Eaters watched, not with anger, but with a sadness that seemed eternal. They made no effort to stop Odysseus, for they knew the power of the fruit and believed the men would return on their own in time. But Odysseus was stronger than that. He bound his crew, tying them to the benches of the ship, so that even if their minds longed to flee, their bodies could not. It was an act of harsh love, born of duty, forged by loyalty to home. As the ship left the shore, the island seemed to recede slowly, as though reluctant to let them go. The men bound upon the benches wept softly, not from pain but from longing, for the sweetness, for the peace, for the forgetting. Their cries pierced Odysseus' heart, but he steeled himself against pity. He knew that their grief would fade, that memory would return in time, and that they would thank him when their minds were their own again. Yet in that moment, he felt the weight of leadership like never before. To save his men, he had to deny them what they thought they wanted. To preserve their true selves, he had to strip from them the false comfort they clung to. As the oars dipped into the sea, carrying them farther from the island, the air grew clearer, the haze of the lotus lifting little by little. The men's eyes grew sharp again, though shadows of sorrow lingered, as though part of them still yearned for the island's forgetting. Odysseus stood at the prow, watching the waves carry them onward. He had resisted the temptation of the lotus, but he knew that many more temptations lay ahead. The sea was filled with trials, each one crafted not only to test their strength, but their will, their hearts, their very memory of why they struggled at all. The memory of the Lotus Island lingered with the men long after its shores had vanished from sight. They spoke of it in hushed tones, not as a place of danger, but as a paradise lost. Some wept quietly in the night, mourning the peace they had left behind. Others grew angry with Odysseus, questioning why he had forced them away from such sweetness. But Odysseus bore their bitterness in silence. He knew that leadership was not the art of pleasing but the burden of guiding, even when the path was hard. In his heart, though, he too felt the memory of the lotus tug at him, whispering of a life without longing, without pain. He shuddered at how close he had come to tasting it, to surrendering. Had he done so, the journey would have ended, not in storms or monsters, but in a quiet surrender to forgetting. The gods had shown him a new kind of trial, not one of violence, but of sweetness. Not one that demanded courage, but one that demanded memory. He had learned that the greatest danger to his journey was not the wrath of Poseidon, nor the fangs of beasts, but the temptation to abandon struggle itself. This knowledge burned in him like a flame, reminding him always to hold fast to the thought of Ithaca, no matter how weary the sea might make him. The men, slowly, began to recover their purpose. Each day upon the sea, their minds sharpened, their memories of home returned, and their longing grew strong once more. They spoke again of wives, of children, of farms waiting to be tended, of hearths cold without them. Yet still, in the quietest hours, Some remembered the lotus with a soft sigh, as though part of their hearts remained upon that island. Odysseus did not scold them for it. He understood. The lotus was not merely fruit. It was the embodiment of every man's secret wish to lay down burdens, to rest forever in ease. It was the dream of peace without labor, love without loss, life without longing. But Odysseus knew that such a dream was false, for without longing, life itself was hollow. He reminded his men of this gently, not with harsh words, but with stories of Ithaca. Each night he spoke of the hills, the olive trees, the sound of waves upon familiar shores. He painted pictures with his words, drawing them back from the haze of forgetting, binding them once more to the purpose that would guide them through the sea's endless trials. And though they still remembered the sweetness, they also remembered why they had left it behind. In the quiet of the ship, Odysseus often pondered the meaning of what they had endured. The lotus had shown him that not all battles are fought with swords, and not all defeats come from loss of strength. Sometimes, the greatest struggle lies within, the temptation to surrender, to forget, to let go of the very thing that gives life meaning. He saw how easily men could be unmade, not by force, but by sweetness. And he wondered if this was the truest cruelty of the gods. Not storms, not monsters, but temptations that played upon the deepest longings of the human heart. For what man, after years of hardship, would not wish to forget? What man would not wish to rest? Yet to yield to such desires was to betray all that one loved, to abandon all that one had fought for. The gods, he thought, did not merely test their strength, but tested their memories, their ability to hold fast to purpose in a world that tempted them to let go. He realized that his journey home was as much a battle of the spirit as of the body, and that he must be as vigilant against temptation as against the sea. The island of the Lotus-Eaters faded behind them, yet its lesson remained sharp in Odysseus' mind. He knew that more trials awaited, that the sea would bring both terrors and temptations. But he also knew now that his greatest weapon was memory, the memory of Ithaca, of Penelope, of Telemachus, of the life that anchored him. He told his men the same, urging them to cling to their memories, to guard them as they would guard a sword in battle. For without memory, he said softly, we are no more than shadows, drifting without purpose. The men nodded, some with eyes wet with understanding, others with quiet determination. They had been touched by forgetfulness, and though they had escaped, they carried with them the knowledge of how fragile the human heart could be. Odysseus stood at the prow once more, the wind tugging at his cloak, the sea stretching before him like an endless road. He felt the gods' eyes upon him, but he also felt the strength of his own will, a strength that no fruit, no storm, no curse could take away. Ithaca remained distant, but it burned within him, a light that even forgetting could not extinguish. And so the ship pressed onward, carrying men who had seen the sweetness of forgetting and had chosen, however reluctantly, to remember. The sea shimmered beneath them, The horizon stretched endless and uncertain, yet within their hearts a fragile strength had returned. They had tasted the danger of ease, the temptation of surrender, and they had been pulled back from its edge by the will of their leader. Odysseus, though weary, felt the burden of his journey settle upon him more heavily than ever, for he understood that each trial would not only test their strength, but their very souls. The lotus had been only the beginning, a gentle reminder that even peace can be peril. Ahead lay storms, monsters, and gods, each with their own snares, each demanding more from the weary travelers. Yet the ship sailed on, steady and sure, its oars dipping into the water in quiet rhythm. Above, the stars glittered like watchful eyes, guiding them through the darkness. The island of the Lotus-Eaters was behind them, but its memory lingered, a memory not of sweetness, but of choice. For they had chosen to remember, chosen to endure, chosen to long for Ithaca still. And in that longing lay the strength that would carry them forward into whatever trials the sea might hold. After the gentle haze of the Lotus-Eaters had been broken, Odysseus led his men back to the sea. Their ship cut once more through the endless blue, each stroke of the oars carrying them farther into unknown waters. The ocean seemed quiet at first, but Odysseus knew that calmness on the surface often concealed hidden dangers. As days passed, they sighted an island of rugged beauty, rising from the waves like a jagged stone cast by the gods themselves. It was a wild place, unshaped by the hand of men, its shores marked not by harbors, but by steep cliffs and rocky strands. From the deck, they saw goats clambering across the hillsides, free and unguarded. The men's stomachs, long empty from their voyage, stirred at the sight. Here, they thought, would be food and shelter. Yet Odysseus, ever curious, ever bold, wished for more than mere sustenance. He had heard whispers of creatures who lived apart from men, shepherds of great flocks, dwelling not in cities nor in villages, but alone upon the land. His heart burned with the desire to see such a being with his own eyes. And so he chose to guide his ship to that place, not knowing that fate was leading him toward the cave of Polyphemus, the Cyclops, giant son of Poseidon, whose single blazing eye saw all who dared trespass. In this moment of decision, Odysseus' path became bound to the curse that still lingered over him, the curse of the sea god himself. The island was quiet as Odysseus and a small band of his men set foot upon its soil. They moved inland, guided by curiosity as much as by hunger. Soon they came upon a vast cave, its entrance shadowed, its walls blackened with soot from ancient fires. Outside, pens of woven stone held goats and sheep, fat and plentiful. The air was thick with the scent of milk and wool, a shepherd's domain. The men urged Odysseus to take what they needed and flee. Meat, cheese, and milk lay within their grasp. But Odysseus, always drawn to the promise of the unknown, resisted. He wished to see the master of this place, to test whether he might be a host or a foe. Hospitality, after all, was sacred in their world. Even strangers in strange lands were bound by the laws of Zeus, who watched over guest and host alike. To Odysseus, this cave held the chance to see that law at work, perhaps even to win gifts for his journey home. So they waited inside the cavern, building a fire, helping themselves to a little of the Cyclops stores while keeping much untouched. The goats bleated outside as the sun dipped low, and a heavy stillness filled the air. It was then, as twilight deepened, that the sound came, a thundering of footsteps, heavy and slow, shaking the earth like drums. The Cyclops was returning to his lair, and with him came the weight of destiny. Polyphemus, the Cyclops, entered his cave like a living mountain. His shoulders were broad as cliffs, his head brushing the darkened roof. In the center of his forehead blazed a single eye, vast and unblinking, its light fierce as fire. He carried upon his back a bundle of dry wood, gathered for his hearth, and with a motion both careless and powerful he dropped it to the floor. The goats bleated in greeting, crowding about his massive legs, yet Polyphemus gave no answer but a grunt. He milked his flock with hands large as boulders, filling vessels of stone. When at last he turned, his eye fell upon the strangers huddled near the fire. His voice rose like thunder, demanding to know who they were, what dared bring them into his home. Odysseus spoke carefully, naming himself only as a wanderer, a traveler cast by storm upon these shores. He called upon the sacred law of Zeus, begging the Cyclops to show them the courtesy of food and shelter. But Polyphemus laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "We Cyclopes care nothing for Zeus," he said. "We are stronger than the gods of Olympus." With those words, Odysseus felt a chill, for he knew then that the laws of men and gods alike held no sway here. This was a place outside of order, a place ruled only by brute strength, and the one-eyed giant before him had strength enough to crush them all. The Cyclops did not linger in questioning. With a motion sudden and terrible, he reached out his massive hand, seized two of Odysseus' men as easily as a child plucks berries, and dashed them against the cave floor. The sound echoed like breaking stone, final and brutal. The others cried out, but there was no escape. Polyphemus devoured them then and there, raw and bloody, his teeth grinding with a sound that chilled the marrow. When he had finished, he stretched himself across the floor and slept, his breath deep and thunderous, shaking the cave as though it were no more than a fragile hut. Odysseus and his surviving men sat frozen in silence, their hearts torn between terror and despair. The entrance of the cave was blocked by a boulder vast and immovable, rolled there by the Cyclops with ease but impossible for mortal men to shift. They were trapped within, lambs in the lair of a lion. All night they sat in darkness, listening to the deep rumble of the giant's sleep, knowing that at dawn the horror would begin again. And in that black stillness, Odysseus' mind turned restless and sharp. He understood that they could not kill the Cyclops outright, for only his strength could remove the stone. Escape would require cunning, not force, and though his heart ached for the dead, he steeled himself for what must come. His wits would be their weapon, subtle and silent, against the brute might of the son of Poseidon. At dawn, the Cyclops stirred. His eye opened, blazing with cruel hunger. He rose and went about his chores as if nothing had happened, milking his goats, setting aside curds of cheese, moving with a calmness that made the horror of the night even more dreadful. Then, without a word, he reached again for 2 more of Odysseus' men. Their cries were brief, their struggle futile, and once again Polyphemus devoured them before the eyes of their companions. When he was satisfied, he rolled aside the great stone just enough to let his flocks pass into the daylight, then sealed the entrance once more, leaving Odysseus and the others imprisoned. The day passed in heavy silence. No sound but the faint bleating of goats and the drip of water from the cave's roof filled their ears. The men despaired, some weeping softly, others staring into emptiness. But Odysseus sat apart, his gaze fixed, his thoughts turning over like the waves of the sea. He considered every path, every trick, until at last an idea began to form. A plan daring and dangerous, yet the only hope that remained. It would require patience, cunning, and courage, and it would demand that his men trust him fully. As evening approached, the sound of Polyphemus' heavy tread shook the ground once more, and Odysseus knew the time had come to put his wits against the monster's strength. That night, Odysseus rose and spoke softly to his men, calming their fear with the steadiness of his voice. He revealed to them the heart of his plan. From a corner of the cave, he had taken a long piece of olive wood, green and sturdy, which the Cyclops had left by the wall. With their combined hands, they sharpened it to a deadly point, then hardened it in the fire until it gleamed red and strong. They hid it beneath a pile of dung and straw, concealing it from the giant's gaze. When the moment comes, Odysseus whispered, "We shall strike together, and his eye will be blinded. Without sight, his strength will falter, and we may yet escape." The men trembled, both with fear and with hope. As the Cyclops returned and shut them in once more, Odysseus stepped forward and offered him a gift, a skin of strong wine brought from the ship, dark and potent. Polyphemus drank deeply and used to such richness, and the sweetness filled his great body with warmth. He demanded more, and Odysseus gave it gladly, until the giant swayed upon his feet, his eye heavy, his tongue thick. Before he sank into sleep, Odysseus gave him a name, not his true one, but a trick. "My name is Nobody," he said, and Polyphemus laughed, never knowing how those words would seal his fate. The Cyclops fell into a drunken slumber, his breath rising and falling like the roar of waves against the shore. At Odysseus' signal, the men crept to the hidden stake. Together, with all the strength of desperation, they lifted it, its sharpened end glowing faintly from the fire's heat. Quiet as shadows, they approached the sleeping giant. Then, with a sudden cry, they drove the stake deep into the center of his great eye. The cavern filled with the sound of sizzling flesh, as if water had been poured upon a blazing fire. Polyphemus bellowed, a roar so vast it shook the stones and seemed to split the very night. He thrashed and clawed, but the men clung fast, turning the stake until the eye was ruined, a hollow darkness where once it had burned. Blinded, the giant staggered, tearing at the air, calling to his brothers across the island. They came, shouting from the cliffs, asking what troubled him. And Polyphemus cried, "Nobody is hurting me. Nobody has blinded me." So they laughed and turned away, thinking their brother raved with dreams. In this way, Odysseus' cunning turned the giant's strength into weakness, and his boastful trick of names became their shield. Yet though the Cyclops could not see, he still had power enough to destroy them, and Odysseus knew that the hardest part of their escape still lay ahead. Blinded and raging, Polyphemus rolled the great boulder from the cave's mouth to let his flock out at dawn, yet he crouched at the entrance, groping with his hands to catch the men as they fled. He was cunning in his own way, for he thought they must attempt to run past him. But Odysseus' mind was sharper still. He tied his men beneath the bellies of the sheep, binding each man with cords of willow so that when the flock filed out, they would pass unseen, hidden beneath the thick wool. As the morning came, Polyphemus stretched out his hand, feeling each animal as it passed. His touch lingered upon the rams, stroking their backs, but he did not think to search beneath. So the men slipped past him, clinging to the warmth of the animals, their hearts pounding like drums in their chests. Odysseus himself chose the largest ram, and as he lay beneath its belly, he listened to the giant's voice, heavy with grief. "My ram," Polyphemus murmured, "why do you lag behind? Are you sorry for your master, who has been blinded by nobody?" The ram bleated softly, carrying its hidden burden, and the words of the Cyclops fell like stones into the silence. At last, the flock passed out into the morning sun, and with it went Odysseus and his men, freed from the darkness of the cave. When they reached the shore, the men scrambled aboard their ship, their limbs trembling with relief. They pushed from the land with all haste, their oars biting the waves, eager to put distance between themselves and the cursed island. Yet Odysseus, proud and unwilling to let his victory go unmarked, could not resist. As the ship drew away, he stood at the stern and called back to the blinded giant, revealing his true name. "It was not nobody who blinded you," he shouted, "but Odysseus of Ithaca, sacker of cities, son of Laertes." His men begged him to be silent, to let the sea carry them away unnoticed, but pride stirred his voice. On the shore, Polyphemus raised his hands to the sky, calling upon his father, Poseidon, god of the sea. With a voice that carried across the waves, he cursed Odysseus, never to reach Ithaca, or if he must, to come late, broken, and in sorrow. These words fell heavy as chains, and the sea itself seemed to shudder. From that moment, Poseidon's anger burned hot against Odysseus, and every wave that followed would carry the weight of the Cyclops' curse. The sea swelled with sudden fury, as if Poseidon himself struck the waters with his trident. Great waves rose, threatening to overturn the ship, while the men rowed desperately, their arms aching with the effort. Yet by fortune or by fate, they escaped, carried onward though not unharmed. The shadow of the curse clung to them like a storm cloud, unseen but heavy. Odysseus sat silent, staring back at the land fading into the distance. He knew his own pride had drawn this wrath upon them. In his heart, he felt the weight of foresight, the knowledge that the road ahead would be long and bitter. Yet even so, a spark of defiance burned within him. For though the gods might conspire against him, though curses might darken his path, he was still Odysseus, master of cunning, a man whose mind was sharper than steel. The men, weary and shaken, looked to him for strength, and he gave it to them with quiet words, urging them onward. In the calm that followed the storm, the ship pressed forward once more, its sail catching the wind, carrying them farther from the Cyclops shore and deeper into the labyrinth of trials yet to come. Night fell upon the sea, cloaking the ship in shadow. The men lay exhausted upon the deck, their bodies broken by fear and effort, yet sleep came to them slowly, haunted by memories of the cave. They saw in their dreams the blazing eye of Polyphemus, the crushing hand, the sound of bones breaking. They awoke in shudders, only to find the sea around them vast and endless, offering no comfort. Odysseus himself did not sleep. He sat at the prow, staring at the stars, guiding their course with eyes that refused rest. He thought of Ithaca, of Penelope weaving at her loom, of Telemachus growing into manhood without his father. These thoughts were both balm and wound, for they gave him purpose yet reminded him of all he had lost. The curse of the Cyclops rang still in his ears, a shadow upon his spirit. Yet he whispered to himself the truth he had always known, that a man is not undone by one hardship, nor by 1,000. So long as breath remains, so long as mind remains, there is a path forward. With that thought, he let the ship drift into the night, trusting the stars to guide them toward whatever trial awaited next. Thus ended the tale of Polyphemus, yet its shadow stretched across all that followed. For in blinding the Cyclops, Odysseus had won his freedom, but in naming himself, he had bound his fate more tightly to the wrath of the sea god. Each wave carried with it the echo of Polyphemus' curse, a reminder that the journey was no longer only a struggle against distance and time, but against the will of the divine. Still, there was a strange peace in the aftermath. The men, though scarred by what they had seen, found solace in their survival. They had escaped the cave, escaped death itself, and for now, that was enough. The sea, though vast and uncertain, felt gentler than the darkness they had left behind. And as the stars turned slowly overhead, Odysseus allowed his eyes to close at last, if only for a moment, resting not in forgetfulness but in resolve. The journey was far from over, yet each trial endured became part of the story, part of the long weaving of fate that stretched from Troy to Ithaca. And though the gods watched with stern eyes, though storms gathered beyond the horizon, Odysseus' ship pressed onward, carrying its weary crew deeper into the heart of the Odyssey. After the storm of the Cyclops curse and the endless days at sea, Odysseus and his men longed for rest. The waves carried them to an island that seemed unlike any they had yet seen. Rising softly from the sea, it shimmered with quiet beauty, its forests rich with towering trees, its meadows bright with wildflowers swaying in the breeze. The air was sweet with the scent of blossoms, mingled with the faint song of birds hidden in the branches. Streams of silver water ran across the land, and the sound of them was like gentle music to ears that had known only the harsh roar of waves. To the weary crew, it appeared a sanctuary, a place apart from their suffering, as though the gods had at last shown them mercy. Yet in the heart of this island dwelled Circe, a goddess of magic and enchantment, whose beauty and power were woven into every leaf, every stone, every breath of wind. She was daughter of Helios, the sun, and niece to the fearsome sorceress Medea, her bloodline steeped in power. Her hall of polished stone stood hidden in the forest, its doors open, its hearth glowing, waiting for strangers who might wander to her domain. But though the island sang with peace, there was danger coiled within its beauty, for Circe's gifts were not freely given. Those who entered her hall would find themselves changed, bound not by chains, but by enchantments sweeter and stronger than steel. Odysseus, cautious after so many trials, sent a party of his men to explore the island while he remained by the ship. They moved quietly through the woods, their feet brushing the mossy earth, their eyes wide with wonder. The forest seemed alive, its trees whispering secrets, its branches bending as though to guide them. After a time, they came upon a great hall of stone, shining with polished walls, its roof supported by columns carved with strange designs. From within drifted the sound of singing, a voice soft, clear, and filled with a beauty that seemed not of this world. It drew them closer, soothing their fears, awakening in them a longing to see the singer's face. At the doorway they paused, peering in, and there they saw her, Circe herself, golden-haired, her form radiant with divine light, moving gracefully as she wove upon a great loom. Her voice rose and fell with her song, and the very air seemed to glow around her. She turned to greet the strangers not with anger, but with a smile, her eyes shining like the sun upon the sea. She welcomed them as guests, bade them sit at her table, and set before them food and drink. Weary and hungry, they accepted eagerly, never seeing the shadow that lay behind her kindness. For the cups she gave them held more than wine, and the bread she offered was laced with enchantment. As they ate and drank, their minds grew heavy, their senses blurred, and Circe raised her wand, speaking words that wove fate around them like a net. In a moment, the men were no longer men. Their bodies twisted, their voices choked, and where once sailors sat, now swine grunted and rooted at the floor. Their eyes, though animal, still bore the terror of human thought, and they turned toward Circe as if begging for mercy. But she only laughed softly, her voice filled with both power and sorrow, as though such transformations were as natural to her as breathing. She herded them into pens outside her hall, where they rooted in the earth, forgetting slowly the faces they once had. Their comrades, waiting by the ship, knew nothing of this fate. Only one man, Eurylochus, had escaped. Suspicious of Circe's charms, he had lingered behind, watching from the shadows. When he saw his fellows transformed, he fled in terror through the forest, his breath ragged, his heart pounding. At last, he reached Odysseus at the shore and told him what had passed, of Circe's beauty, her song, her feast, and the dreadful fate that had befallen the crew. Fear gripped the men at the ship, for how could any mortal stand against a goddess? Yet Odysseus, though shaken, did not hesitate. His heart burned with resolve. He would not abandon his companions, even if it meant facing a sorceress whose power rivaled that of the gods. Alone, he turned toward the forest path, each step a vow that he would either free his men or share their fate. Odysseus moved cautiously through the forest, each step measured and quiet. The shadows of the trees stretched long and strange in the fading light, and the scent of wildflowers mingled with the faint tang of the sea. He could hear the distant bleating of the transformed men, now reduced to swine, yet he forced himself to focus on his path. The forest seemed alive, whispering warnings in every rustle of leaf and shifting shadow. At last, he reached the polished hall of Circe. Its doors stood open, golden light spilling out, illuminating the forest floor like a sunbeam fallen from the sky. Odysseus paused at the threshold, his heart beating slowly but deliberately, sensing both the danger and the promise within. The goddess herself awaited him, seated gracefully at her loom, her hair falling like threads of sunlight, her eyes meeting his with curiosity rather than anger. He felt the pull of her power, a magnetic force that seemed to reach into his very soul. And yet, he recalled the suffering of his men, their voices transformed, their bodies lost. He did not hesitate. He stepped into the hall, his gaze steady, his mind focused, and though the air shimmered with enchantment, he felt the weight of determination settle upon him like a cloak. He would confront Circe, not with force, but with the cunning and courage that had carried him across the seas, past storms, monsters, and the curse of the Cyclops. Circe greeted him with a smile, her voice lilting like wind over water. "You have come alone," she said softly, her tone warm yet laced with hidden power. "Few dare to step into my hall without fear." Odysseus replied with calm words, speaking of his purpose, of the men he had lost, and of the need to restore them to their true forms. Circe's gaze lingered on him, measuring, studying. Then she stood, moving like a golden shadow across the floor, her wand glinting faintly in her hand. "Many have tried," she said, "to confront me with courage and cleverness alike. Most fail." Odysseus did not flinch. He spoke humbly, yet firmly, acknowledging her power while maintaining his own will. In her eyes, he saw a flicker of intrigue, a spark that recognized the mind of a mortal equal to her in cunning. She gestured to the table, offering a cup of wine, and Odysseus paused. He knew well the danger of accepting gifts from those who weave enchantments, and yet he accepted, not carelessly, but with careful intention. He had brought with him a herb given by Hermes, the messenger god, who had whispered guidance to shield him from Circe's magic. With this protection, Odysseus drank, feeling the warmth spread through him without the haze of transformation that had claimed his men. Circe's surprise was subtle but visible, her golden hair shimmering as she observed him. The herb had nullified her spell, and yet she did not retreat. Instead, she studied him, her eyes searching his, as if testing the depths of his courage and his mind. Odysseus spoke again, now gently, persuading her to release his companions. He did not demand, for he understood that in the presence of a goddess, arrogance could prove fatal. Instead, he appealed to her curiosity, her sense of wonder, her love of challenge. He promised nothing but patience and respect, yet in his words lay a clever thread, a promise of admiration and acknowledgement of her power. Circe's laughter, soft as the wind through leaves, filled the hall. "Few men approach with such mind and spirit," she said. And in that moment, the spell that had held his companions was lifted, their forms slowly shifting back into human shape, a process that seemed both miraculous and inevitable. They looked around in confusion, tasting the sweetness of restored flesh, their eyes meeting Odysseus with relief and awe. The danger had passed, yet the lesson lingered. That charm, magic, and beauty could be as perilous as any sword, and that courage and wisdom together could overcome even divine power. For days, the crew remained on Circe's island, resting and recovering from the ordeal. The goddess treated them with care, offering food that nourished both body and spirit, though never again attempting to transform them. Odysseus moved freely among the hall and forest, learning the rhythms of this magical place, observing Circe as she moved with a grace beyond mortal comprehension. He watched how she tended her animals, how she tended the hearth, how she wove her spells, all with a rhythm as natural as the tides. Yet temptation lingered in every glance, every word, every gesture. Circe's beauty and charm were profound, drawing the hearts of men toward her effortlessly. Odysseus, though tempted, remained resolute, mindful of Ithaca, Penelope, and the journey that had yet to be completed. He spoke often with Hermes' counsel in mind, reminding himself that comfort and ease were seductive but fleeting. He taught his men, gently, to be wary of indulgence, to savor rest without surrendering their purpose. In the quiet evenings, as the sun fell behind the forest, the men gathered around fires, listening to the soft song of the goddess as they contemplated the delicate balance of power, charm, and self-discipline. Here, in the warmth of magic and safety, they were reminded that temptation could be as binding as chains and courage as subtle as thought. Odysseus and Circe spoke often in these days, exchanging stories of the sea, of the lands they had seen, and of the spirits and gods who shaped the world. Circe, intrigued by his wisdom and resilience, offered guidance on the perils that lay ahead. Sirens whose song ensnared the mind. Scylla and Charybdis lurking in narrow straits, and the winds of Aeolus that could aid or destroy. Odysseus listened attentively, his mind weaving strategies, plotting courses, and storing knowledge for journeys yet to come. His men, meanwhile, learned from observation, quietly regaining their strength and courage, their loyalty deepened by the trials they had endured together. The island, beautiful though it was, had taught them the duality of power, that the most gentle hand could also hold the greatest danger, and that freedom often required vigilance and intelligence as much as strength. Circe herself, once aloof and enigmatic, now regarded them with a mixture of respect and curiosity, recognizing in their leader the spark of a mortal mind capable of navigating divine tests. The lessons of the island would linger long in their hearts, a gentle but firm reminder of both temptation and resilience, shaping the men for the trials that still awaited them across the endless seas. One night, Odysseus stood alone on the shore, gazing at the moonlight glinting off the waves. The island was still, the forest quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves. He reflected on the delicate dance between power and wisdom, between temptation and duty. Circe's enchantments, though now rendered harmless, had tested not only the men but his own resolve, his ability to resist comfort, beauty, and magic itself. He understood that the sea held more than monsters and storms. It held illusions, dreams, and desires meant to sway the heart from its course. He recalled the Cyclops, the Lotus-Eaters, the perils yet unseen, and felt both weariness and resolve. To lead was to endure, to navigate not only waves but hearts, and to preserve purpose against every lure. The stars above, distant and constant, reminded him of Ithaca, of home, of all he had promised himself and Penelope. And in that quiet reflection, he found a kind of peace, not surrender, not ease, but clarity. The path forward would be long, fraught with danger, yet he had learned that courage tempered with wisdom and vigilance mingled with patience could carry a man through even the most subtle perils of the world. As dawn spread pale light across the forest, Odysseus gathered his men to prepare for departure. They packed their provisions, repaired sails, and took a final look at the enchanted island, its streams glittering like silver threads, its trees tall and serene. Circe approached, offering a parting gift, counsel, herbs to aid their journey, and warnings of the temptations they would face. She smiled, her gaze both tender and inscrutable, a reminder of the power that had shaped their stay. Odysseus thanked her humbly, accepting her gifts with reverence and caution. His men, renewed in body and spirit, were buoyed by hope, strengthened not only by rest but by the trials they had endured. The lesson of Circe's island had been clear. Even the sweetest hospitality could conceal danger. Even beauty could wield power. But knowledge, courage, and careful thought could protect a man from ruin. And so, with hearts steady and purpose restored, they readied the ship, each man silently committing to the journey ahead, aware that comfort and temptation would return again, but determined not to be swayed. The ship cut through the waves once more, carrying Odysseus and his crew away from the magical island, its forest fading into a shimmer of green and gold in the morning light. They moved with the quiet rhythm of oars and wind, yet each man felt the lingering effect of Circe's enchantment in subtle ways, a soft longing for ease, a fleeting desire for the comfort they had left behind. Odysseus spoke gently to his men, reminding them that temptation could arise in forms both obvious and hidden, in gestures, in beauty, in words. He shared with them the lessons of the island, to trust in courage, to value wisdom, and to preserve loyalty to home above all else. The men listened quietly, the memory of swine bodies and enchanted wine still vivid in their minds, their determination renewed. Though the sea stretched endlessly before them, and though storms and trials awaited, there was a quiet confidence among them, born not of ignorance, but of experience. Circe's island had tested them, shaped them, and in some strange way, strengthened them for the perilous road that stretched across the waters toward their ultimate destination. And so, with the enchanted island behind them, Odysseus allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The wind carried them onward, the sun sparkled upon the waves, and the world seemed wide and alive. Circe's lessons lingered in quiet corners of the mind. The knowledge that beauty and magic could be perilous, that comfort could bind, and that wisdom must temper desire. The men sat upon the deck, rested and alert, their hearts tempered by experience, their purpose sharpened by trials both subtle and severe. Odysseus, standing at the prow, gazed toward the horizon, thinking of Ithaca, of Penelope, of the journey that still stretched before him. The island of magic, temptation, and learning faded behind them, yet its memory remained, a soft, guiding echo, reminding them that vigilance, courage, and cleverness were as necessary as strength on the endless, unpredictable seas. And as the ship sailed onward into the vast embrace of the ocean, each man felt a quiet understanding that the journey itself, with all its perils and enchantments, was as important as the home they sought, and that the trials they endured shaped not only their path, but their very selves. After leaving Circe's island, Odysseus guided his ship steadily through the open seas, the wind carrying them along currents both familiar and strange. The men were silent, reflecting on the lessons they had learned, yet each felt the undercurrent of tension that lingered from past encounters. The Cyclops, the Lotus-Eaters, and the gentle peril of Circe's magic. Odysseus, wise and ever vigilant, had already learned that the world was filled with dangers both visible and hidden, and now he sensed that their journey required preparation beyond mere strength or cunning. He spoke to his men gently, explaining that the next trial would require courage of a different sort, a confrontation not with monsters of flesh, but with spirits of the dead, with knowledge hidden beyond the veil of the living. The air grew heavy as they approached the edge of the known world, the sky darkening, the sea taking on an unusual stillness. Even the gulls that normally circled the waves were silent, as though warning of the journey ahead. Odysseus felt a shiver of anticipation, for the underworld was no place for the faint of heart. It was a land of shadows, where memories lingered and truths were revealed, and he knew that to navigate it safely, he would need wisdom as sharp as any sword. His crew, though nervous, trusted him, and he reassured them with the calm steadiness of a captain who had faced storms, sorcery, and giants alike. Guided by Circe's instructions, they sailed to the westernmost point of the earth, where the sun sets upon endless waters, and the air grew thick with mist. The landscape transformed subtly, the waves quieter, almost expectant, and a strange, silver glow fell upon the horizon. They prepared offerings, milk, honey, and barley, to honor the dead and summon the spirits that could guide them. Odysseus knew that respect and ritual were as important as courage in the realm of Hades, where the ghosts of mortals and the shades of heroes lingered between worlds. They dug a pit upon a barren shore, pouring the libations slowly, watching as the liquid soaked into the soil, drawing attention from unseen eyes. Then he drew his sword in a calm, deliberate motion, not for combat, but to mark their presence and ward against unseen threats. The wind stilled completely, and the air took on a hushed quality, as though the world itself held its breath. Odysseus whispered names of those he sought to speak with, calling to the shades, offering words of respect and remembrance. Slowly, from the pit, a black mist began to rise, thick and curling, forming the shapes of the departed. The men trembled slightly, yet Odysseus stood firm, ready to meet the shadows and hear what the underworld had to reveal. The first spirit to appear was Elpenor, one of Odysseus' own crew, recently deceased and not yet buried. His form shimmered, faintly human but cloaked in the pallor of death. "Odysseus," he whispered, his voice thin as air. "I died unburied, my body left to the winds. Pray, you must return to Circe's island, and bury me with care, or my soul will wander in unrest." Odysseus nodded solemnly, feeling the weight of responsibility press upon him. He promised that the rite would be performed, and Elpenor's shade faded, leaving a sense of quiet sorrow in its wake. This first encounter reminded Odysseus and his men that the dead carried burdens, unresolved and heavy, and that neglect or disrespect could haunt even the bravest hearts. The air seemed colder, the mists curling more thickly, and a sense of gravity fell upon the crew. One by one, shades began to gather, figures familiar and strange, some calling their names, others whispering of deeds long past. Each encounter was brief yet profound, teaching the men lessons of mortality, duty, and the fleeting nature of life. Odysseus, calm and measured, greeted each spirit with humility and respect, drawing knowledge and warnings from those. who had already passed beyond the reach of mortal life. Next, the ghost of the great prophet Tiresias emerged, a figure cloaked in the solemn dignity of death. His presence radiated wisdom, and his eyes, though unseeing in the mortal sense, seemed to pierce through time itself. Tiresias spoke slowly, each word weighted with meaning. "Odysseus," he said, "you seek your home, yet the road is perilous, fraught with storms and sorrow. The wrath of Poseidon will pursue you, and only by caution and cunning will you survive. You will face Sirens whose song ensnares the mind, Scylla and Charybdis, monsters of the deep, and the sun god's cattle, whose desecration will bring doom. Beware your own pride, and listen to your heart, for patience and wisdom are your greatest allies." Odysseus listened intently, absorbing every syllable, understanding that the words of the dead were not to be taken lightly. His men trembled as they heard the prophecy, realizing that the journey home required more than strength or courage. It required foresight, restraint, and trust in their leader. Tiresias' form shimmered and receded, leaving behind the heavy silence of forewarning. The air felt charged, each ripple of mist carrying the weight of destiny. The Underworld, Odysseus knew, was a place where truths were absolute, where warnings could not be ignored, and where the journey's outcome was shaped as much by choices and restraint as by the fury of gods or the might of monsters. As the mist swirled and shifted, Odysseus encountered the shades of his mother, Anticlea, and other fallen comrades. Their forms were faint, whispering names and memories, and Odysseus' heart ached with longing and sorrow. "Son," his mother murmured, "do not lose hope, but be cautious. The world beyond life is patient, yet mortal hearts are fragile." Her words struck him deeply, a reminder of love lost and life suspended between worlds. The men around him felt the same pull, witnessing the power of grief and memory manifested before their eyes. In these encounters, Odysseus realized that the underworld was not merely a realm of fear, but of reflection, of truths that could guide the living. Each spirit offered insight into decisions and mistakes, each shade a mirror of mortality and consequence. The night stretched on, slow and hushed, and the sea seemed distant, as if suspended in a dream, while the wind whispered faintly through unseen corridors of shadow. Odysseus moved among the spirits with calm purpose, gathering understanding, listening to warnings, and silently recording each prophecy for the trials that would await beyond the mists. The journey, though shadowed, was a vital preparation, a lesson in humility, caution, and foresight that could save them from perils yet unseen. Odysseus also encountered the great heroes of the past: Agamemnon, fallen in betrayal; Achilles, whose glory had been shadowed by mortality; and Ajax, steadfast in honor, yet twisted by anger and death. Each spoke briefly, offering fragments of wisdom and caution. "Remember," said Agamemnon, "the folly of pride, the cost of leaving home, the necessity of careful choice. Achilles spoke not with anger, but with a quiet melancholy. Glory fades, yet duty endures. Choose wisely, Odysseus, and do not let desire blind you. Their words weighed heavily upon him, grounding him in the knowledge that even the greatest heroes are subject to fate, and that mortal cunning must respect the boundaries of life and death. The men listened in silence, feeling the strange mixture of awe and fear that accompanies direct contact with the dead. Shadows shifted in the pale light, whispers of stories long past echoing through the mist. Odysseus, calm and steady, guided his crew with quiet words, reminding them to honor each encounter, to learn, and to remember. For the underworld, though frightening, was also a place of preparation, a realm where insight, prophecy, and caution could fortify them for the journey home. Among the shadows, Odysseus learned of choices yet to come, paths that could lead to disaster or deliverance. The dead spoke not only of dangers, but of resilience, courage, and the value of foresight. He understood that mortal life is shaped as much by wisdom as by strength, and that survival depended upon patience, observation, and careful action. He reflected on the crew's trials so far, the lessons of Circe, Polyphemus, and the Lotus-Eaters, and saw a pattern emerging. Each challenge required more than force. It required insight. As the mists deepened, the underworld revealed truths not seen in the light of day. Odysseus listened to whispers of coming storms, of the deceitful sweetness of the Sirens, and of the dangers lurking near narrow straits. He learned the names of places and currents, of monsters and trials, and carefully wove each detail into the fabric of his memory. The men, though fearful, followed him faithfully, absorbing the lessons with quiet reverence. The journey through shadow became a meditation, a slow preparation for the world of wind and water, monster and god, that awaited beyond the veil. Before leaving, Odysseus offered the spirits another gesture of respect, pouring libations into the soil, speaking words of gratitude and remembrance. The mists rose, curling like smoke, and the shades of the dead gradually receded, leaving the living with a profound sense of quiet and gravity. Odysseus' men, transformed not physically but in spirit, felt the weight of the encounter settle upon them, a mixture of relief, awe, and sober understanding. They now carried knowledge of danger, the importance of discipline, and the delicate balance between action and caution. The underworld had not been cruel, but instructive, revealing truths that could not have been learned elsewhere. Odysseus himself felt the lingering touch of prophecy, its threads weaving quietly into his mind, shaping decisions yet to come. The journey ahead would test them in ways both expected and unforeseen, but the lessons of the dead gave him confidence that insight, cunning, and resolve could guide them safely, even through the most perilous waters. When the mists cleared and the first hints of dawn appeared, Odysseus led his crew back to their ship. The air felt lighter, the waves less threatening, and the sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting gold upon the water. Yet even in this return to the world of the living, the memory of the underworld remained, a subtle reminder that mortality is fragile, that choices carry weight, and that knowledge is as vital as strength. The men moved with quiet purpose, silently honoring the dead whose guidance had been offered, carrying their lessons within each thought and motion. Odysseus stood at the prow, gazing toward the distant seas, mindful that danger and temptation would continue to follow, yet fortified with the wisdom granted by shades and prophecy. The underworld, though dark and silent, had illuminated the path ahead, and in its shadows lay the light of foresight, courage, and careful decision. Each oar stroke now felt measured, deliberate, and informed by the lessons whispered in shadowed corridors of the dead. As the ship pressed onward, Odysseus reflected upon the nature of life and death, of destiny and choice. The ghosts he had met were not merely warnings. They were mirrors of his own future, glimpses of possibilities that might come to pass if pride or impatience led him astray. The prophecy of Tiresias lingered in his mind, guiding his thoughts and actions, reminding him that even the cleverest mortal could falter without caution. The crew, now seasoned by experiences both mortal and spectral, adjusted sails, prepared provisions, and watched the horizon, each man quietly considering the lessons of the underworld. The wind was gentle, carrying them steadily, yet a tension remained in the air, the knowledge that greater trials were still ahead. Odysseus allowed himself a soft breath, acknowledging both the weight of responsibility and the calm resolve that had carried them thus far. The journey through shadow had been transformative, grounding them in both humility and vigilance, preparing them for the ocean's unpredictable embrace. Night fell gently upon the waves, stars appearing like distant beacons of hope. The men rested, their eyes heavy, hearts still attentive, minds filled with the whispers and lessons of the underworld. Odysseus remained at the prow, alert yet meditative, tracing the constellations and the currents in his memory. The ghosts and prophecies had taught him patience, foresight, and the necessity of balance between courage and caution. The experience lingered as a quiet hum beneath every thought, a reminder that the living are shaped by those who have passed, that wisdom flows not only from strength, but from attention to voices long gone. In this gentle night, the ship drifted steadily forward, each stroke of the oar a rhythm both soothing and purposeful, carrying them closer to trials foretold yet unseen, toward shores of destiny and home alike. By dawn, the underworld faded entirely behind them, its mists lifting as the first rays of sun touched the waters. The crew, though weary, moved with renewed purpose, aware that knowledge of the dead's counsel was now a tool as powerful as any weapon. Odysseus felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of preparedness that bolstered both body and mind. The journey through shadow had revealed truths, tested resolve, and offered insight that would guide them through the next stages of their voyage. Though danger, temptation, and divine wrath awaited, the underworld had illuminated the path ahead. Its lessons, subtle and profound, would remain with them always, a gentle yet persistent whisper guiding each choice, each turn of the ship, each stroke of the oar. And so, with the sea stretching endlessly before them, they sailed on, carrying the wisdom of the dead into the light of the living world, each man quiet, thoughtful, and more ready than ever for the trials yet to come. After emerging from the underworld, Odysseus guided his ship along the rolling waves, the horizon stretching wide and endless before them. The crew was quiet, each man reflecting on the ghosts and prophecies they had witnessed, the lessons lingering like soft shadows over the mind. The sea, calm yet restless, seemed to hum with the memory of things unseen, of dangers and enchantments yet to reveal themselves. Odysseus, alert yet serene, scanned the waters and the skies, aware that the Sirens' domain lay ahead, a place where the very air seemed laden with the promise of doom, where sound and beauty could ensnare even the strongest heart. The stories he had heard in Troy, in Ithaca, and from Circe had warned him of the Sirens' voices, melodies so perfect, so enticing, that no mortal could resist. Yet he understood now that knowledge and preparation were shields as strong as any sword, and with calm deliberation, he planned to navigate this peril with foresight, strategy, and care. The men, still recovering from their encounter with death and spirits, felt a quiet tension in the air. Even the gentle lapping of the waves seemed a prelude to temptation, a reminder that danger often wore the guise of beauty. Odysseus spoke softly, reassuring them of their course, of the steps they would take to preserve both mind and body, and of the vigilance that would be required as they approached the Sirens' haunting realm. As they neared the narrow strait where the Sirens were said to dwell, the sea itself seemed to change. The waters shimmered with a strange, almost hypnotic glow, and a gentle mist rose from the waves, curling around the ship like delicate fingers of smoke. The air grew thick with the scent of brine and something else, something sweet, intoxicating, and almost imperceptible. Odysseus instructed the men to prepare wax for their ears, filling them carefully, and to tie him securely to the mast, should he fall under the spell of the Siren's song. There was no panic, only a quiet, careful focus, the rhythm of preparation almost meditative. The crew obeyed calmly, following each instruction with trust and precision. Odysseus, feeling the tension in the air, allowed himself a slow breath, acknowledging both the peril and the necessity of restraint. The Sirens' island loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the horizon, quiet yet filled with an unseen promise. Even from a distance, he could sense the pull of the songs, like threads tugging gently at the heart, urging attention, curiosity, desire. But with wax in their ears and trust in their captain, the crew would remain safe. Odysseus, tied firmly yet comfortably, braced himself for what he must hear and resist, for the Siren's song would call not just to his ears but to the deepest yearnings of the mind and soul. Then the song began, soft at first, a whisper carried on the wind, a melody both tender and terrifying. It spoke of knowledge, of lost loves, of home and longing, weaving images so vivid that the mind reached instinctively toward them. Odysseus, though tied securely, felt a flutter of temptation ripple through his heart, a gentle tug at memories and desires he had long held dear. The voices were perfect in harmony, in rhythm, in every nuance, as if the air itself had become music. He could feel the pull of the melodies reaching past the barriers of wax and rope, brushing against the edges of thought and memory. His hands strained slightly against the ropes, his heart quickening, yet he remained steadfast, clinging to the knowledge that this was a test not of strength alone, but of control, of the ability to navigate desire without surrender. Around him, the men rode steadily, oblivious to the intricate allure that sought to unravel the mind, and yet aware, in a subtle way, that every stroke of the oar carried them past unseen danger. Odysseus' mind danced along the edge of imagination and longing, yet he remained anchored in purpose, aware that yielding even briefly would bring ruin. The Sirens' song grew in intensity, their voices layered like threads of gold and silver, each note a whisper of temptation, each phrase a delicate snare. Odysseus felt images flash through his mind. Ithaca's shores, Penelope's soft smile, the lives he had touched and left behind, all wrapped in the hypnotic cadence of the Sirens' music. The pleasure of listening was accompanied by a subtle, insidious unease, as if the song sought not only to enchant but to disorient. He breathed slowly, focusing on the ropes, on the wax-filled ears of his men, on the certainty of purpose that had carried them thus far. The island passed alongside them, jagged and indifferent, yet every wave seemed infused with the echo of the song, a gentle insistence that drew at the soul. Odysseus whispered quietly to himself, affirming reason, recounting duties, and reminding himself of the path that lay ahead. The melody attempted to weave threads of doubt and longing, yet the calm, deliberate rhythm of rowing, the sound of the sea beneath the keel, and the knowledge of his men's safety grounded him. The Sirens' voices, perfect and eternal in their beauty, could not touch the mind that refused to yield. Minutes, or perhaps hours, seemed to stretch, the world narrowing to the circle of sound, the tension of the ropes, and the steady rhythm of oars. Odysseus' body trembled faintly, a reaction not to fear, but to the sheer force of allure. The song painted visions of distant lands, treasures lost to time, and glories beyond imagination, promising understanding of all things mortal and divine. Yet he held fast, each breath a measured anchor against the tide of temptation. His men rowed with unwavering focus, their eyes forward, oblivious to the enchantment pressing against their minds, a testament to discipline and obedience. The ropes held him, the wax protected the crew, and the ship sailed onward, guided by a combination of trust, preparation, and awareness. Odysseus' thoughts wandered gently, observing the delicate tension between desire and discipline, between listening and resisting, and he found within himself a quiet admiration for the balance of mind and body that such trials required. The Sirens' song, though compelling, was powerless against the deliberate application of wisdom and restraint. And slowly, as the distance from the island grew, the melody faded, leaving only the sound of the wind, the lapping waves, and the quiet, shared relief of men who had faced enchantment and survived. Odysseus, still tied to the mast, allowed himself a slow exhale, the tension leaving his shoulders in measured waves. The island receded into the distance, its beauty now tinged with a soft melancholy, a memory rather than an immediate threat. He observed his men, their brows damp with sweat, their arms strong from steady rowing, yet serene in demeanor. The trial of the Sirens had passed, not through brute force, but through preparation, trust, and the careful application of foresight. Odysseus released a soft word of encouragement, thanking his crew for their vigilance, their focus, and their steadfastness. The ropes were loosened, the wax removed, and he allowed himself a quiet stretch, reveling in the calm after tension, in the gentle transition from danger back into normalcy. The sea, unchanging and vast, seemed to approve of their passage, its waves whispering faint congratulations, or perhaps merely murmuring as always, indifferent yet constant. The lesson of the Sirens lingered in the minds of all, that temptation is subtle, pervasive, and persistent, yet awareness and preparation can guide one safely through even the most beguiling trials. As the Sirens' island receded behind them, a sense of quiet reflection settled over the crew. The world seemed larger, the waves gentler, yet the memory of the haunting melody lingered in the corners of thought. Odysseus allowed the men to speak softly, of what they had imagined during the song, of visions that flitted like shadows across their minds. They shared in hushed tones, careful not to disrupt the calm that now enveloped the ship. Each man recognized that the Sirens' power was not rooted in violence or threat, but in desire and subtle seduction. They had learned that vigilance and preparation, coupled with trust and leadership, could protect them from the most enchanting dangers. Odysseus reflected on the delicate balance between curiosity and caution, realizing that the song had revealed as much about their own hearts as it had about the creatures themselves. In that quiet, the sea seemed almost to breathe with them, each wave a gentle rhythm, each gust of wind a soft reminder of movement, of progress, and of the journey yet to come. In the days that followed, Odysseus encouraged calm routines among the crew. They mended sails, tended the ship, and kept watch with quiet diligence, letting the ocean's lull carry them forward. He spoke to them gently, recounting the encounter with the Sirens not as a tale of fear, but as a story of mastery and mindfulness. The men absorbed his words with a slow understanding, their thoughts turning inward as they considered the subtle lessons of temptation, trust, and self-control. Even in rest, the memory of the Sirens' voices hummed faintly in the mind, like distant music that invited reflection rather than distraction. Odysseus used these moments to reinforce patience, to cultivate awareness, and to prepare for trials yet unseen, storms, monsters, and the wrath of the gods. The sea, vast and indifferent, continued to roll beneath them, a constant companion that mirrored both their struggles and their triumphs. In this slow rhythm, the crew found both solace and readiness, knowing that the greatest challenges often arrived without warning, disguised in beauty or whispered temptation. Odysseus, standing at the prow in the gentle morning light, contemplated the nature of desire itself. The Sirens' song, though distant now, had reminded him of the strength required to maintain focus, to honor promises, and to resist fleeting pleasures that could lead to ruin. He watched the waves, each crest and trough a steady rhythm, and he imagined the lives of mortals bound by the same choices, between immediate delight and long-term purpose. The crew moved in quiet harmony, their oars slicing through the water, their minds alert yet serene. Even the birds circling above seemed calm, their calls soft and distant. Odysseus recognized that leadership, like navigation, required attentiveness to both subtle cues and grand patterns, that survival depended on foresight, patience, and careful judgment. The Song of the Sirens would linger in memory, a reminder that danger often wears the guise of pleasure, and that the ability to act wisely and resist temptation is among the most valuable tools a mortal can possess. As night fell, the stars emerged slowly, twinkling faintly above the endless waters. The crew rested, their bodies weary but minds alert, reflecting on the subtle lessons embedded within the Sirens' challenge. Odysseus spoke softly, reminding them that the world is full of beauty and danger interwoven, and that the ability to navigate both requires not only strength but wisdom. He described the song, not in its entirety, but in its effect, emphasizing how it revealed desires, longings, and vulnerabilities that might otherwise remain hidden. The men listened quietly, the rhythm of the ship and the soft whisper of waves creating a gentle, meditative cadence. Each heart absorbed the lesson differently, yet all understood that vigilance and preparation were paramount. Even in moments of calm, the crew recognized that temptations could appear subtly, as words, sounds, or visions, and that maintaining focus on purpose was a skill honed through experience and attention. The following morning, Odysseus led the men in a slow, deliberate review of their journey. They spoke softly of challenges past and those yet to come, sharing reflections without haste or alarm. The Sirens' song, though now only a memory, had imprinted a subtle clarity in their minds. The knowledge that allure and danger are often intertwined, and that discipline and awareness provide the safest path. Odysseus guided them with quiet confidence, emphasizing not fear, but mindfulness, foresight, and measured action. The sea carried them steadily, the waves gentle, the wind a soft, constant companion. In this slow rhythm, the crew internalized the lessons of the Sirens, understanding that the mind's strength could protect them as much as any physical skill. The ship moved forward, a vessel not only across water but through understanding, patience, and resilience. By the time the Sirens' island had vanished completely from view, a soft calm settled over both men and ship. The sea stretched wide and peaceful, its surface glittering in the sun, reflecting the quiet determination of the crew. Odysseus felt a gentle satisfaction, not from conquest, but from awareness, preparation, and the subtle mastery of self. The Sirens' song had tested not only ears and hearts, but the essence of discipline and foresight, leaving each man a little wiser, a little more attuned to the intricate threads of desire and danger that wove through their journey. As they sailed onward toward trials yet unseen, the memory of the song lingered gently in their minds, a quiet echo to remind them of focus, vigilance, and the steady courage that would guide them safely through every enchanting peril the wide, unpredictable sea might offer. The world stretched endlessly ahead, filled with mystery, challenge, and subtle beauty. Yet each man knew they carried within them the strength to navigate it, guided by wisdom, restraint, and the calm certainty of purpose. After surviving the Sirens' enchanting song, Odysseus guided his ship onward, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. The crew, still thoughtful from their previous encounters, rode with steady rhythm, the gentle rise and fall of the waves lulling them into a careful calm. Yet Odysseus' mind remained alert, scanning the horizon and recalling the warnings of Tiresias and Circe. Ahead lay the narrow strait between Scylla and Charybdis, a place where the sea itself seemed alive with danger, where currents twisted and churned as though the water carried intent. Scylla, the six-headed monster perched high on jagged cliffs, and Charybdis, the swirling whirlpool below, awaited the unwary. Odysseus knew that this passage would test not only their courage but their skill, judgment, and ability to balance risk with caution. The air grew heavier as they approached, carrying a faint scent of salt and something more, a sharp, almost metallic tang, warning of peril yet unseen. The ship's timbers creaked softly in the rhythm of motion, the oars slicing through water that seemed to ripple with anticipation. Every man felt the tension, subtle but persistent, as if the sea itself held its breath. Odysseus, calm and deliberate, spoke quietly to his crew, emphasizing focus and careful observation, reminding them that vigilance and steady action would guide them safely between monsters both grotesque and inexorable. As they neared the strait, the cliffs rose sharply from the sea, jagged rocks like the teeth of a sleeping predator. The roar of distant waters echoed through the narrow passage, and the men instinctively drew closer to one another, their hands steady on the oars, but their hearts quickened with anticipation. Odysseus observed Scylla first, a fearsome creature with 6 heads, each snapping in quiet, patient hunger, eyes gleaming with instinctive malice. Her movement was slow yet deliberate, each head poised to strike, each gaze sharp enough to pierce the mind of any who dared approach. Below, Charybdis churned the water in a relentless whirlpool, a dark, swirling vortex that threatened to swallow ship and crew whole. Odysseus understood that neither strength nor speed alone would ensure survival. Careful navigation, timing, and an acceptance of necessary risk were essential. He whispered instructions, clear and calm, guiding the men to keep the ship as far from Charybdis as possible, while acknowledging that some danger from Scylla could not be avoided. The men obeyed silently, every motion precise, their muscles attuned to the rhythm of the ship and the looming threat. Even in fear, there was trust, a slow, steady understanding that together they could endure what no single man could face alone. The first glimpse of Scylla's head snapping downward was like a shadow passing over the sun, swift and terrible. Odysseus had predicted some loss. He knew that no matter how carefully they steered, the monster's reach would claim some of his crew. He steadied himself against the mast, eyes scanning the positions of the oarsmen, calculating the safest path, measuring the distance between peril and progress. The men rowed with precision, each stroke carefully timed, synchronized with the movement of the waves and the subtle shifts in the currents below. Scylla's mouth snapped with horrifying accuracy, yet the rhythm of the ship allowed only a fraction of loss, fewer than might have been expected. Still, cries of men claimed echoed over the water, and Odysseus felt the sorrow of necessary sacrifice press against his heart, a weight heavier than any stone. Even in the midst of terror, he maintained calm, his voice gentle yet firm, guiding the remaining crew through motions that balanced courage with caution. Each second was both eternity and fleeting, a meditation in danger, where awareness, preparation, and trust in leadership became shields as powerful as any physical barrier. Beneath them, Charybdis roared, the whirlpools swirl threatening to pull the ship into a spiral of destruction. The men adjusted the sails, tilting the vessel with careful calculation, keeping the momentum just enough to avoid the dark pull below. Odysseus felt the water tug at the hull, a subtle but insistent warning, and he called out instructions, calm and measured, guiding each hand and eye to maintain perfect synchronization. The currents twisted around them, testing both skill and nerve, yet each man followed without hesitation, muscles and minds attuned to the rhythm of sea and ship. The air carried the faint tang of brine and terror, a scent that both sharpened and subdued thought. Odysseus allowed himself brief observations, noting patterns in the whirlpool's motion, subtle shifts in wind and wave, the timing of Scylla's heads, all weaving into a careful mental map. The interplay of these dangers required a combination of courage, wisdom, and acceptance, the understanding that even skill could not prevent all loss, yet that careful action could preserve life. The men rowed steadily, their synchronized effort forming a gentle, steady heartbeat beneath the roar of monsters, and slowly, ever so slowly, the ship edged past the most dangerous center of the strait. As the ship passed the apex of the whirlpool, one of Scylla's heads struck with sudden precision. A man was lost, claimed by the monster's hunger despite every precaution. The sound of the attack echoed faintly across the waves, a reminder that even the most careful navigation carried inevitable sorrow. Odysseus did not falter. His voice remained calm, steady, instructing the crew to maintain rhythm, to focus on survival and movement rather than fear. The loss was mourned silently, the men acknowledging the delicate balance between caution and fate. Each stroke of the oar now carried a dual weight, propelling them forward, yet mindful of the cost exacted by the monsters they passed. Odysseus felt the water tug at the hull, a subtle but insistent warning, and he called out instructions, calm and measured, guiding each hand and eye to maintain perfect synchronization. The currents twisted around them, testing both skill and nerve, yet each man followed without hesitation, muscles and minds attuned to the rhythm of sea and ship. The air carried the faint tang of brine and terror, a scent that both sharpened and subdued thought. Odysseus allowed himself brief observations, noting patterns in the whirlpool's motion, subtle shifts in wind and wave, the timing of Scylla's heads, all weaving into a careful mental map. The interplay of these dangers required a combination of courage, wisdom, and acceptance, the understanding that even skill could not prevent all loss, yet that careful action could preserve life. The men rowed steadily, their synchronized effort forming a gentle, steady heartbeat beneath the roar of monsters, and slowly, ever so slowly, the ship edged past the most dangerous center of the strait. As the ship passed the apex of the whirlpool, one of Scylla's heads struck with sudden precision. A man was lost, claimed by the monster's hunger despite every precaution. The sound of the attack echoed faintly across the waves, a reminder that even the most careful navigation carried inevitable sorrow. Odysseus did not falter. His voice remained calm, steady, instructing the crew to maintain rhythm, to focus on survival and movement rather than fear. The loss was mourned silently, the men acknowledging the delicate balance between caution and fate. Each stroke of the oar now carried a dual weight, propelling them forward, yet mindful of the cost exacted by the monsters they passed. Odysseus' calm determination became a quiet anchor, a gentle force that guided both mind and body, ensuring that panic did not multiply tragedy. The strait tested not only courage, but leadership, trust, and the ability to reconcile action with inevitability. The sea, alive and indifferent, flowed around them, a reminder of forces beyond mortal control, while their steady rowing carved a path between terror and survival, each movement deliberate, each heartbeat a measure of endurance. Once the ship cleared the central swirl of Charybdis, the roar of the whirlpool gradually softened, and the menace of Scylla's heads receded into the distance. The crew, though shaken, breathed slowly, feeling the tension release in quiet waves. Odysseus allowed a moment of reflection, observing the water and the cliffs, recognizing the narrow margin by which they had passed. He spoke gently to the men, reinforcing the lesson that danger often lies in balance, that survival requires judgment, awareness, and acceptance of what cannot be prevented. The air seemed calmer now, carrying only the scent of salt and freedom, the tension of the strait dissipating like mist under sunlight. Each man felt the dual emotions of sorrow and relief, the quiet understanding that courage guided by intelligence can navigate even the most perilous passages. The sea, constant and vast, reflected the sky above, offering a mirror of both the dangers left behind and the calm of the moments ahead. Odysseus encouraged gentle conversation and measured rest, allowing the crew to process loss while regaining energy, reinforcing the slow rhythm of travel, reflection, and preparedness that defined their journey. In the soft light of evening, the men repaired minor damage to the ship, checked supplies, and adjusted sails to match the gentle wind. The horrors of the strait, though receding, lingered in quiet memory, a shadow upon consciousness, reminding them that courage alone does not guarantee survival, and that preparation and strategy are as vital as strength. Odysseus moved among them, offering guidance, reassurance, and calm presence, his words measured, his tone soft, encouraging mindfulness and reflection. They spoke of Scylla and Charybdis not as monsters to fear, but as teachers of endurance, of timing, and of the intricate balance between control and acceptance. Even as night fell, the rhythmic lapping of waves and the gentle sway of the ship carried a sense of meditation, a quiet grounding after trials endured. Odysseus observed each man, noting resilience, attentiveness, and understanding, aware that such moments of reflection are as essential to survival as skill and courage in action. Night deepened, stars appearing slowly overhead, their light soft and distant. Odysseus sat at the prow for a long while, gazing at constellations familiar from youth and long journeys, their shapes offering calm and guidance. He thought of the crew, of those lost to Scylla's hunger, and of the inevitability of some dangers in life and sea. There was sorrow, yes, yet also quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that through careful action, strategy, and calm, the majority had been spared. The rhythm of oars and gentle waves formed a lullaby of sorts, carrying with it both reflection and hope. Odysseus allowed himself to consider lessons learned. Vigilance must balance courage, foresight must temper impulse, and acceptance of loss is as necessary as striving for survival. The men slept, some in quiet watch, others fully rested, each body and mind recovering in the gentle, rocking embrace of the sea. By dawn, the cliffs of the strait were only distant silhouettes, the whirlpool nothing more than a memory rippling across the calm waters. Odysseus spoke softly to his crew, reinforcing lessons learned, reminding them that survival often requires more than strength. It requires observation, timing, and measured acceptance of risk. The sorrow of lost companions remained, yet it blended with relief, understanding, and cautious triumph. The crew moved with quiet purpose, tending sails, checking rigging, and sharing reflective conversation, each man integrating the experience into growing wisdom. Odysseus recognized the delicate, almost meditative quality of this phase of travel, the combination of alertness and calm, action and reflection, sorrow and relief. The sea, patient and constant, carried them forward, each ripple and gust a subtle companion in the rhythm of navigation, teaching endurance and balance as profoundly as any visible threat. As hours passed, Odysseus encouraged rest, allowing each man to recover from both physical and mental strain. The passage through the strait had tested nerves, skill, and judgment, yet the lessons embedded within remained subtle and enduring. Courage must be measured, vigilance constant, and acceptance of loss inevitable. The men sat quietly, gazing at the horizon, the gentle rocking of the ship and soft lap of water creating a hypnotic calm. Even the memory of Scylla's snapping heads and Charybdis' swirling vortex seemed softened by distance, more a lesson than terror. Odysseus reflected on the intertwining of danger and patience, realizing that life's trials often present themselves not in abrupt chaos, but in continuous, nuanced challenges that reward awareness and foresight. The crew, guided by this steady presence, absorbed these lessons in silence, their minds settling like sediment, slowly and completely. The day wore on in a quiet rhythm of oars, wind, and sun, each motion deliberate, each breath measured. Odysseus observed patterns in the water and sky, attuning himself to the subtle cues that might indicate upcoming danger. Even in calm, there is a lesson. Vigilance does not end with the absence of immediate threat, and awareness is a shield as enduring as courage. The crew, now seasoned by multiple trials, the Sirens, the Underworld, Scylla, and Charybdis, moved with quiet confidence, trusting in preparation, in leadership, and in the measured, deliberate approach to danger that had guided them thus far. The strait had imparted a slow, deep knowledge that even monstrous threats could be navigated safely with calm observation, careful timing, and a steady heart. Each oar stroke was a meditation, each adjustment of sail a lesson, and the men absorbed the rhythm of sea and strategy as quietly as sleep itself. By nightfall, the cliffs and whirlpools were far behind, fading into memory, leaving only the gentle expanse of open sea before them. Odysseus allowed himself and the crew to relax, the tension of the strait replaced by a soft, reflective calm. The lessons endured, courage measured by prudence, vigilance paired with patience, and acceptance woven with action. They had emerged alive, having navigated between monsters with strategy and trust, and in this gentle victory, they found quiet satisfaction. The stars above, the soft whisper of waves, and the rocking of the ship created a hypnotic lull, a gentle reminder that the sea, though full of perils, also offered peace to those attentive to its rhythms. Odysseus watched his crew settle, their minds absorbing lessons in subtle, persistent ways, and felt the quiet assurance that the trials ahead, though many, could be met with calm, measured wisdom, and the steady heart of a captain who had learned the delicate balance of survival between monsters, waves, and fate. After surviving the narrow strait between Scylla and Charybdis, Odysseus and his remaining crew sailed into calmer waters, the horizon stretching wide and tranquil. But soon, the allure of an island appeared, bathed in golden sunlight and framed by gentle waves that whispered against white sands. This was the domain of Calypso, the nymph whose beauty and magic were as enchanting as the sea itself. Odysseus felt a quiet mixture of relief and wariness, knowing that comfort and danger often arrive hand in hand. The island promised rest, shelter, and respite from the relentless sea, yet he sensed the subtle weight of captivity beneath the beauty, the unseen threads that could bind a man's heart and will. As the ship anchored, the crew remained cautious, observing the lush greenery, the rhythmic rustle of leaves, and the faint fragrance of unknown flowers. Odysseus stepped ashore slowly, mindful of every sound, every shift in the breeze, aware that the island's calm exterior could mask trials of longing, patience, and endurance. The sea behind him reflected his journey, vast, unpredictable, and filled with echoes of past challenges. Here, in the serene embrace of Calypso's realm, he would face a different kind of test, one measured not by monsters or whirlpools, but by time, desire, and the subtle pull of enchantment that could stretch the years into a quiet, almost imperceptible captivity. Calypso appeared in the soft light, her form radiant yet unthreatening, her voice like the distant hum of waves over sand. She welcomed Odysseus gently, offering comfort, food, and shelter, weaving her words with a melody that could both soothe and ensnare. He felt the quiet temptation of permanence, the pull of a life removed from storms, loss, and constant uncertainty. The island itself seemed to breathe with her presence, the air heavy with the scent of exotic blooms, the forest alive with unseen birds, the water glinting with playful light. Odysseus, attentive and deliberate, accepted the offerings with gratitude, yet maintained a subtle awareness, understanding that freedom was never guaranteed by beauty alone. Days began to flow slowly, measured by the rising and setting sun, the rhythmic lap of waves, and the gentle sway of the island's trees. He observed the passage of time as both friend and foe, knowing that the calm could lull a man into forgetfulness, and that captivity was often less about chains than about comfort's quiet persuasion. The crew, ever reduced in number, remained silent, adjusting to the island's rhythm, each man aware that safety here required caution, vigilance, and the quiet fortitude of patience. Time on Calypso's island moved differently, each day blending softly into the next, marked only by the subtle rhythms of nature and the slow passage of hours. Odysseus explored the beaches, the forests, and the hidden streams, noting the beauty of coral, the playful leaps of fish, and the gentle call of birds overhead. Yet beneath the surface of splendor lay a quiet tension, an invisible tether to the nymph whose attention never wavered. Calypso's magic was subtle and pervasive, a sense of ease that encouraged contentment, a warmth that suggested permanence, a gentle pull on the heart and mind. Odysseus resisted, reminding himself of Ithaca, Penelope, and the life that awaited beyond this island. He observed his own desires, tracing the soft threads of longing and comfort, recognizing the danger in surrendering to ease. Days stretched into months, and months into years, each moment an intricate meditation on patience, resilience, and the slow mastery of self. The sea, visible beyond the island's cliffs, remained a constant reminder of journeys yet unfinished, of storms weathered and trials awaiting. In the quiet hours of dawn and dusk, Odysseus felt both gratitude for respite and the subtle ache of confinement, a duality that measured the passage of time more acutely than any visible chain. The nights on Calypso's island carried a unique serenity, the stars reflected in quiet pools of water and mirrored in the endless expanse of the sea. Odysseus lay awake often, listening to the gentle chorus of waves and the subtle rustle of nocturnal creatures, his thoughts drifting to home, to Penelope, and to the years that had already passed. Calypso's presence, comforting and constant, was tempered by the awareness that this was not freedom, but a different form of captivity. Her soft voice, sometimes singing or whispering in the wind, was both balm and test, reminding Odysseus that even in paradise, the mind must remain vigilant. The island's beauty encouraged reflection, yet also subtle forgetfulness, and he had to measure each indulgence and comfort with awareness of the world beyond the horizon. The crew, though silent and largely absent from daily conversation, shared in this rhythm, each man adjusting to the island's pulse, finding solace while remaining alert. In these quiet nights, Odysseus learned to observe not only the patterns of nature, but the patterns of his own heart, recognizing the fine line between contentment and surrender, between appreciation and entrapment. Seasons shifted imperceptibly, marked by changes in vegetation, the color of flowers, and the subtle variations in temperature and light. Odysseus noted these transformations with deliberate care, understanding that time's passage was both friend and adversary. Calypso's attention remained constant, her offers of comfort unceasing, yet Odysseus maintained a gentle resistance, grounding himself in memories of Ithaca and the promise of return. The rhythm of daily life was slow and meditative, mornings filled with exploration, afternoons with observation or reflection, evenings with soft conversation or quiet work. The island's enchantment was gentle, pervasive, yet Odysseus' mind remained anchored, a candle of purpose flickering steadily despite the winds of temptation. He observed the subtle effects of time on both himself and the few remaining crew, noticing how prolonged safety and beauty could dull the edges of urgency. And yet, the horizon always called, a distant promise beyond the waves, a reminder that freedom, though deferred, was a goal to hold in quiet patience and deliberate hope. Calypso, patient and attentive, never forced her presence, yet the island's comfort was a soft snare. Odysseus reflected on the paradox of captivity here. No chains, no visible threat, only the subtle, pervasive ease that tempted surrender. The lessons were profound, that danger is not always abrupt, that temptation can appear as serenity, and that the mind itself is a vessel both fragile and resilient. Odysseus practiced mindfulness, observing each desire, each fleeting thought, and each impulse toward contentment. He walked along hidden paths, swam in quiet coves, and noted the rhythms of the sea, birds, and wind, each moment a meditation on balance between indulgence and purpose. The crew adapted similarly, moving through routines designed to preserve skill, focus, and awareness even as the years stretched on. In the soft embrace of time, they cultivated resilience, patience, and subtle attentiveness, recognizing that freedom is as much a matter of mind as of circumstance. Over time, Odysseus grew attuned to the island's subtle rhythms, noticing the minute patterns in the flight of birds, the gentle shifts of tides, and the quiet changes in wind through the trees. Even in this relative calm, he measured the passage of years with deliberate attention, noting how the mind can both expand and shrink under long-term comfort. Calypso's presence was constant, her beauty unyielding, yet he never allowed himself to forget the distant shores of Ithaca. The island, for all its tranquility, became a mirror of his own thoughts, a place where longing, memory, and patience intertwined. Odysseus reflected on the nature of time and captivity, realizing that the mind can remain free even when the body lingers in one place, and that self-awareness is a sanctuary against subtle enchantments. Each day, whether filled with exploration, conversation, or quiet reflection, was a practice in resilience, a meditation on balancing immediate comfort with distant purpose. The island's charm was undeniable, yet his heart remained anchored in the promise of return, a steady flame amidst the soft lapping of waves and the whispering of leaves. The nights continued to be gentle, filled with the soft chorus of insects, the distant call of nocturnal birds, and the rhythmic murmur of waves against the shore. Odysseus often walked along the beach under the stars, the soft sand cool beneath his feet, and the reflection of constellations glimmering on the water. In these quiet moments, he contemplated the nature of longing, of desire, and of time stretched thin by enchantment. Calypso would occasionally appear, her voice a soothing melody in the night air, yet Odysseus maintained a calm awareness, listening without surrendering. The slow passage of years offered both lessons and trials, the danger of complacency, the gentle seduction of ease, and the subtle erosion of urgency. He counseled himself quietly, reinforcing the promise of Ithaca, the image of Penelope, and the life waiting beyond this serene prison. Each step, each breath, was measured with mindfulness, a small anchor against the currents of desire that the island's beauty and magic tried to stir. Even in captivity, he found a rhythm, a meditative cadence that kept his mind alert and his purpose intact, the gentle balance of reflection and determination carrying him forward through quiet, endless days. Odysseus noticed how the crew adapted to the island's rhythm in different ways. Some men found solace in tending small gardens, fishing in the shallow coves, or quietly exploring hidden paths. Others retreated into contemplative silence, their minds wandering through memories of home, of family, and of battles endured. Even amidst comfort, there was vigilance, a subtle awareness of the passage of time and the necessity of self-discipline. Odysseus observed these behaviors with calm curiosity, guiding them gently, encouraging reflection, and emphasizing mindfulness over complacency. Calypso, with her constant attention, never imposed, yet the gentle pull of her presence created a subtle tension between contentment and longing. Odysseus measured his days with deliberate care, alternating between exploration, rest, and quiet reflection, understanding that the slow passage of years could either dull or strengthen the mind. Each moment became an exercise in patience, self-restraint, and subtle awareness, a meditation on enduring beauty and temptation while holding fast to purpose. As seasons turned, the island's colors shifted softly, blossoms fading and returning, leaves turning warm in gentle sunlight, tides moving with quiet constancy. Odysseus used these changes to mark the rhythm of time, noting how even the smallest details of nature could anchor perception in a steady cadence. Calypso's enchantment was constant yet subtle, the allure of permanence, of endless days in comfort and beauty, was ever present. Odysseus recognized this as a test of the mind and spirit rather than the body, a challenge of patience, awareness, and subtle self-mastery. He reflected on the interplay between longing and contentment, the tension between the immediate pleasures of the island and the distant promise of home. Even in serenity, there was vigilance, the awareness that captivity need not be overt to be complete, that chains can take the form of enchantment, and that freedom is both a state of mind and a journey to be pursued. The gentle rhythm of life on the island became both a meditation and a training of endurance, strengthening quiet resilience even as the years stretched slowly, like waves curling upon the shore. Odysseus often spent hours gazing at the horizon, tracing the outline of distant waters, imagining the paths yet to follow, and letting the gentle sound of waves guide his thoughts. In these quiet reveries, he measured his own patience, observing how subtle comforts could weigh heavily upon the spirit if left unchecked. The island offered safety, nourishment, and beauty, yet it demanded a vigilance of mind, a steady awareness of the pull of ease. Odysseus practiced reflection as a gentle exercise, noting desires, examining intentions, and reaffirming the promise of Ithaca. He encouraged the remaining crew to cultivate similar mindfulness, recognizing that the subtleties of enchantment often require the quietest defenses: observation, deliberation, and calm acceptance. Even in captivity, there was opportunity for growth, for strengthening of purpose, and for deep reflection on the intricate balance between desire, restraint, and long-term objective. The slow days became lessons in themselves, each one a gentle reminder of the mind's endurance and the delicate art of holding onto freedom within the confines of comfort. Years passed, measured softly by sunrise and sunset, by tides and seasons, yet Odysseus' mind remained anchored in the distant promise of home. Calypso's beauty, her gentle enchantments, and the island's unending comfort had tested him in ways more subtle than any monster, whirlpool, or storm. Yet through careful observation, mindfulness, and unwavering reflection on purpose, he preserved both heart and will. The crew, though diminished and quiet, absorbed similar lessons, learning that endurance is not always measured in action, but in patience, awareness, and subtle vigilance. The island, though paradisiacal, became a meditation on the delicate balance between comfort and captivity, desire and discipline. As Odysseus looked across the gentle waves, the horizon stretched endlessly before him, carrying both the weight of years spent in quiet reflection and the promise of a journey still to come. Here, in the soft rhythm of sea, sky, and time, he held fast to hope, understanding that even the gentlest enchantments could be met with patience, wisdom, and the quiet certainty of purpose. At last, after years of wandering across seas both calm and violent, Odysseus approached the shores of Ithaca. The land, familiar yet altered by time, stretched before him in gentle hills and quiet coves, bathed in a soft golden light. His heart swelled with quiet anticipation, tempered by caution. The kingdom he once knew had endured both his absence and the ceaseless machinations of those who sought to claim his place. The sea, which had been both adversary and guide, now whispered of home, carrying the subtle scent of pine, salt, and fertile soil. Odysseus, aware of the dangers that lingered even in familiar surroundings, chose to move slowly, to observe, and to plan with deliberate care. He disguised himself as a beggar, softening his presence to avoid immediate recognition, knowing that patience and subtlety would be his allies in reclaiming what was rightfully his. Each step upon Ithaca's soil carried weight, memories of family, of hearth and hall, and of years spent mastering patience, resilience, and subtlety. The journey had taught him that triumph requires not only strength and cunning, but timing, observation, and a quiet, steady heart. The air, warm and gentle, seemed to embrace him, yet whispered caution, reminding him that even home can be fraught with unseen threats. Odysseus observed the hall of his palace from a distance, noting its changes and the presence of those who lingered within. Suitors had taken root in his absence, feasting, boasting, and pressing their claims upon his family and estate. He studied them quietly, noticing gestures, patterns, and moments of distraction that might be exploited. Disguised, he approached the threshold, his steps careful and deliberate, blending into the rhythm of the household without drawing attention. The servants, some loyal, some wary, treated him with a mixture of suspicion and mild amusement, unaware of the man who moved among them. Odysseus listened to the murmurs and whispers, noting the subtleties of each voice, each glance. In this quiet observation, he recalled lessons learned from previous encounters, the importance of timing, restraint, and the measured application of knowledge. Strength alone could not reclaim what had been lost. Subtlety, patience, and careful discernment were required. Each moment became a meditation, each conversation a quiet test of awareness. As he navigated the palace's corridors, learning the balance between blending in and preparing for action. The world he had known had changed, yet the essence of his purpose remained: to reclaim his home, his family, and the order disrupted by absence and chaos. Odysseus moved among the hall with careful attention, noting the luxury and excess that had taken hold in his absence. The suitors laughed, ate, and spoke freely, unaware of the keen eye observing each subtle gesture, each hint of arrogance or fear. He noted the loyalty of servants who remained true, the quiet concern of those who sensed disorder, and the invisible tensions woven through the household like delicate threads. Every detail became a lesson in patience and strategy, reminding him that the reclamation of home required far more than force. It demanded careful orchestration and restraint. Even as he accepted food and shelter in the guise of a beggar, his mind measured possibilities, potential outcomes, and the delicate timing necessary to act decisively. The palace, though opulent, echoed with a subtle dissonance, a reminder that power and presence without awareness can lead to ruin. Odysseus walked slowly, deliberately, absorbing the rhythm of the household, allowing his mind to reconcile memory with the current reality, and preparing for the moment when his purpose would unfold with quiet, unwavering precision. Each step was both movement and meditation, an internal preparation for the challenge of reclaiming a kingdom disrupted by time, absence, and the folly of those who had taken advantage. Of his long voyage, the bow, his father's bow, lay in the hall, a symbol of legacy and rightful authority. Its presence was both a lure and a test, a reminder of strength, skill, and the subtle patience required to wield it. Odysseus observed it from afar, allowing desire to settle quietly in the heart, restrained by the knowledge that timing, not haste, would determine success. The suitors, proud and boastful, had tried their hands upon it, laughing at their own failures, oblivious to the lesson it represented, that true mastery requires patience, focus, and a lifetime of experience. Odysseus allowed the moment to unfold slowly, noting each reaction, each gesture of arrogance, each subtle distraction that might aid him. In the quiet rhythm of observation, he measured both his own anticipation and the folly of others, recognizing that the path to reclamation is often paved with patience and quiet strategy. The bow, resting gently in its place, became a symbol not merely of strength, but of preparation, awareness, and the quiet mastery of self, all of which had been honed through years of wandering, suffering, and reflection across seas and trials untold. The day of the contest arrived, measured by slow, deliberate preparation. Odysseus, still disguised, approached the bow with calm certainty, feeling the years of training and endurance converge in a single moment. The suitors watched, unaware of the master in their midst, their arrogance creating a gentle tension that rippled across the hall. Each man tried in vain to string the bow, muscles straining, faces flushed with effort and frustration. Odysseus observed quietly, noting the futility of their attempts, the subtle imbalance of pride and weakness that revealed their unpreparedness. His hands, steady and sure, lifted the bow, feeling the familiar weight and curve, the memory of countless hours spent in practice and patience settling in like a lullaby of motion. The room, though filled with tension, seemed to slow, every breath, every heartbeat in quiet alignment with the task at hand. This was a moment where skill met patience, and where years of experience and endurance would converge with precision, timing, and quiet resolve. When Odysseus finally drew the bow, the sound of the string stretching seemed almost to harmonize with the soft rhythm of the hall, a gentle resonance that whispered of inevitability. His movements were deliberate, measured, and unhurried, each action infused with years of mastery, resilience, and the calm focus honed through endless trials. The suitors watched in disbelief, their arrogance fading into quiet awe, unaware that the beggar before them held the weight of a lifetime of experience and the quiet certainty of purpose. Odysseus aimed, not in haste, but with patient precision, allowing every subtle adjustment, every careful consideration to guide his hand. The arrow slid smoothly from the string, its flight silent yet decisive, a whisper of inevitability that carried through the hall. In this quiet act, years of wandering, patience, and struggle coalesced, revealing that mastery is not measured solely in strength, but in timing, observation, and the subtle control of both body and mind. The bow, once a symbol of challenge, became a vessel for the reclamation of home, honor, and rightful order, executed with calm certainty and meditative focus. After the bow was strung and the arrow released, a quiet stillness settled over the hall. The suitors, frozen in disbelief and shame, could barely comprehend the skill and certainty displayed by the beggar before them. Odysseus allowed the moment to linger, each heartbeat measured, each breath slow and deliberate. The power of patience, observation, and endurance became evident, a silent testament to the years spent wandering and surviving across the seas. In this soft, suspended moment, the hall itself seemed to pause, the air thick with anticipation and subtle awe. Odysseus felt no rush, no need to hurry the inevitable. His calm presence and quiet mastery were enough to restore order and assert authority. He moved with deliberate care, each gesture precise, each glance measured, allowing his awareness to guide both action and observation. The lessons learned from the Sirens, from Scylla and Charybdis, from Calypso's island, all converged in this act, a quiet culmination of patience, skill, and reflective endurance. Odysseus surveyed the suitors with calm eyes, noting the shifts in posture, the fleeting expressions of fear and confusion, and the subtle tremor of arrogance dissolving. He allowed them a moment to absorb their failure, their unpreparedness exposed by experience, patience, and quiet resolve. In this gentle dominance, there was no immediate violence yet, only the soft certainty that their actions had consequences. The hall, once filled with laughter and excess, now resonated with a slow, measured tension, a quiet acknowledgement that power and strength are meaningful only when tempered by foresight, patience, and awareness. Odysseus' gaze softened as he considered the passage of time, the endurance of trials, and the subtle mastery of both self and circumstance. The suitor's presence, though threatening, had become an opportunity for quiet reflection, for demonstrating that wisdom and calm often surpass brute force. In this serene yet commanding way, Odysseus established authority not through haste or anger, but through the quiet accumulation of skill, experience, and deliberate observation. The bow became a symbol, not merely of physical strength, but of discernment, patience, and the culmination of years of wandering and learning. Odysseus held it with ease, its curve familiar beneath his fingers, each notch and grain a reminder of the journey that had honed mind, body, and heart. He observed the room, allowing the suitors to understand, without words, that true mastery demands preparation, restraint, and steady focus. The arrow, now rested in the quiver, represented more than victory. It embodied endurance, wisdom, and the quiet power of measured action. Odysseus' calm presence radiated through the hall, infusing the space with the subtle authority accumulated over a lifetime of trials. Every glance, every step, was deliberate, reflecting a man who had learned the value of timing, patience, and subtle awareness. The suitors, unsettled by the quiet force of his presence, could feel the weight of inevitability without it being forced upon them, a gentle yet inescapable lesson. Odysseus moved among the hall with slow deliberation, assessing both loyalty and intention. Servants who remained faithful observed his quiet strength, their trust deepening in the calm certainty he displayed. Those who had wavered were subtly reminded of their position, not through harsh words, but through measured gestures, quiet authority, and the undeniable skill demonstrated with the bow. The palace, once filled with excess and noise, now reflected order restored through quiet mastery and thoughtful observation. Odysseus allowed himself to savor the subtle triumph, recognizing that reclamation of home requires more than courage. It requires patience, discernment, and the careful orchestration of time, attention, and perception. Every moment unfolded slowly, each breath and step measured, creating a rhythm of authority that was both gentle and absolute. In this quiet manner, Odysseus prepared the household for the final steps of restoration, knowing that his presence, skill, and wisdom would guide the unfolding resolution. Evening approached, and Odysseus allowed himself a brief pause to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The seas traversed, the monsters faced, the enchantments endured. All of it converged in this quiet reclamation of home and purpose. He moved with gentle precision, aware that every word, glance, and gesture would ripple through the household, subtly shaping outcomes and ensuring that order could be restored without unnecessary chaos. The suitors, sensing the inevitability of consequence, remained silent, their presence tempered by the soft, steady authority emanating from the beggar who was truly king. Odysseus reflected on the lessons of patience and observation, recognizing that true power is often invisible, unfolding through the quiet accumulation of skill, endurance, and careful attention. The hall, bathed in the warm glow of dusk, seemed to breathe with him, every shadow and sound part of a subtle rhythm of restoration and reflection. As night deepened, Ithaca's familiar coastline stretched softly beyond the windows of the hall, the gentle sound of waves on the shore carrying a lullaby of completion and calm. Odysseus, the beggar king, stood quietly, bow at his side, aware of both the journey behind and the path ahead. The reclamation of home was not abrupt, but measured, deliberate, and complete, guided by the lessons of endurance, patience, and subtle mastery gained through years of wandering, temptation, and trial. The suitors had been confronted, the household stabilized, and the rhythm of order restored, all without haste or fury, only the quiet certainty of purpose and deliberate action. Odysseus allowed a moment to breathe, the soft sigh of the evening wind mingling with distant waves, carrying a sense of gentle triumph and serene completion. In this quiet, meditative moment, the kingdom felt right again, the balance restored, and the beggar king stood not merely as a ruler, but as a man tempered by time, wisdom, and the subtle mastery of both self and circumstance. The night embraced him softly, carrying the promise of rest, reflection, and the gentle continuation of life on Ithaca. At last, Odysseus approached the private chamber of his home, the final threshold between wandering and return. The air carried the familiar scent of olive oil, polished wood, and hearth smoke, subtle reminders of the life he had left behind so long ago. His heart, tempered by years of trials and endurance, beat with quiet anticipation. The halls were calm, the nights soft, and every sound seemed amplified in its gentle significance. The rustle of a curtain, the distant whisper of a servant, the soft sigh of the wind through the open windows. Odysseus, still mindful of subtlety and timing, moved slowly, observing each detail, every shadow, every shift in light. He carried with him not only the skills honed through battle, survival, and endurance, but the deep, reflective patience cultivated through years of wandering, temptation, and loss. Each step toward Penelope was measured, deliberate, and careful, a meditation on the culmination of a journey long in both distance and time. The familiar chamber, once a space of quiet domestic rhythm, now held the weight of anticipation, the promise of reunion, and the subtle tension of a meeting long deferred yet finally at hand. Penelope moved quietly in her chamber, unaware at first of the figure approaching. Her mind, often occupied with worry, memory, and the care of Ithaca, rested now in a rare calm, a gentle rhythm of evening light and domestic order. The years of absence had left their mark, shaping her patience, wisdom, and quiet strength, much like the trials had shaped Odysseus. She paused, a soft sense of intuition stirring in the stillness, a subtle awareness that something had shifted in the house, in the air, in the rhythm of night itself. Odysseus observed her gently from the doorway, noting the curve of her posture, the calm confidence in her measured movements, and the quiet strength carried in her presence. He allowed the moment to unfold slowly, letting anticipation settle softly, recognizing that reunion, like the culmination of a long journey, thrives in patience, subtle observation, and deliberate timing. The familiar space, familiar yet changed, held the quiet tension of deferred recognition, the gentle pull of memory and longing, and the soft promise that years of separation were drawing to their gentle close. Odysseus stepped closer, each movement deliberate, quiet, and unhurried, allowing the soft rhythm of the chamber to absorb his presence. Penelope, sensing the subtle shift, looked up, her eyes meeting a gaze both familiar and transformed by time. In that instant, there was recognition, but tempered by calm reflection, by the awareness that this meeting was not merely of bodies, but of hearts and minds tempered by endurance, patience, and longing. The silence stretched gently, carrying the weight of years spent apart, yet suffused with warmth, relief, and a quiet joy that only slowly blooms after hardship. Odysseus spoke softly, words carefully measured, gentle and deliberate, each syllable a soft bridge across the expanse of time and distance. Penelope listened, her own voice rising in calm response, carrying a melody of recognition, relief, and tentative reassurance. The reunion unfolded not in abrupt excitement, but in the soft, measured rhythm of careful observation, mutual awareness, and the subtle reweaving of bonds that had endured even through absence. The chamber seemed to breathe with them, absorbing the quiet energy of the long-awaited reunion. Odysseus extended his hand slowly, a gesture both simple and profound, and Penelope, with gentle deliberation, accepted it. In that touch, there was a lifetime of endurance, longing, and unspoken stories, an acknowledgement of absence, struggle, and patient survival. Their eyes met again, lingering in quiet reflection, absorbing the weight of years spent apart, of battles, wanderings, and subtle triumphs, yet now tempered with the serenity of return. Odysseus' heart, long attuned to the lessons of patience and resilience, felt a calm swell of satisfaction, a soft fulfillment of purpose achieved. Penelope, with eyes reflecting both relief and enduring strength, mirrored this quiet joy, recognizing in Odysseus not just her husband returned, but the culmination of a journey defined by careful observation, endurance, and the quiet mastery of self. The soft rhythm of shared breath and gentle movement filled the room, creating a tranquil space where the past and present merged seamlessly in the calm intimacy of homecoming. They spoke softly of memories, of times before departure, of the small rhythms of home, and of the enduring presence of hope through years of waiting. Each word was deliberate, each pause a gentle meditation on absence and return. The years apart, filled with trials, longing, and reflection, now wove themselves into quiet narrative, a tapestry of endurance, love, and patience. Odysseus, careful not to overwhelm with emotion, allowed the reunion to unfold slowly, observing the subtle responses in Penelope's gaze, her gestures, and the soft cadence of her voice. In this gentle interplay, the layers of distance and longing dissolved, leaving a quiet connection grounded in shared history, subtle understanding, and the deep, reflective patience nurtured by time. The chamber's soft lighting, the quiet whisper of the evening wind, and the subtle warmth of the hearth created an atmosphere of calm, reinforcing the meditative rhythm of reunion, where presence alone communicated volumes more than words could convey. Odysseus allowed Penelope to speak first of the hardships endured in his absence, of the suitor's excesses, and of the careful patience required to maintain order. He listened with deliberate attention, each word processed in calm reflection, absorbing not only the facts but the subtle tones of endurance, resilience, and quiet strength. Penelope's voice, steady and soft, resonated with years of wisdom and measured vigilance, a mirror to Odysseus' own cultivated patience. In listening, Odysseus honored the depth of her experience, acknowledging the delicate balance she had maintained through trials both subtle and overt. Their exchange, slow and deliberate, became a meditation in itself, a quiet acknowledgement that the return to home is not merely physical, but an intricate process of re-establishing trust, connection, and shared understanding, all unfolding gently in the calm rhythm of presence and attention. Time seemed to stretch gently in the chamber as they moved closer, not in haste, but in deliberate reconnection. Odysseus shared the soft echoes of his journeys, recounting moments of danger, enchantment, and endurance with measured speech, allowing Penelope to absorb and reflect on each story. She, in turn, shared reflections on Ithaca, the household, and the subtle ways she had preserved order and hope. Their words intertwined like the gentle tides outside, ebbing and flowing, creating a calm, shared rhythm that carried the weight of separation while embracing the softness of reunion. The air seemed lighter, the room warmer, as patience and presence created a sanctuary where the years of wandering could finally rest. The gentle touch of familiarity returned gradually. A hand on a shoulder, a soft gaze, a quiet acknowledgement of shared space and history. Odysseus observed the smallest movements, the delicate nuances of Penelope's expression, appreciating the subtleties that only years apart could magnify. In this quiet observation, he recognized the depth of their bond, strengthened not by ease, but by endurance, patience, and the careful cultivation of trust. Penelope, sensing his attention and the quiet certainty in his presence, allowed herself a slow relaxation, the tension of years spent waiting dissipating in measured breaths. Their reunion was a delicate choreography, guided by reflection, observation, and gentle presence, unfolding in a rhythm both calm and complete. Evening deepened, carrying with it the soft murmurs of the household settling for night. Odysseus and Penelope, immersed in the quiet intimacy of reunion, felt the subtle weight of years dissolve into the gentle cadence of homecoming. The world outside, with all its challenges and memories, receded as the soft rhythm of hearth and presence embraced them. Each movement, each glance, each whispered word carried the quiet resonance of patient endurance, revealing that the ultimate homecoming is measured not in immediacy, but in the slow, deliberate reconnection of hearts and minds. The chamber, warmed by soft lamplight, echoed the gentle flow of relief, joy, and serenity that accompanies a return long awaited. They shared silence often, allowing the calm of proximity to speak more than words. Odysseus rested beside Penelope, listening to her breathing, the quiet rustle of fabrics, the distant sounds of the night beyond the chamber walls. In this gentle rhythm, the final lessons of his journey, the patience of wandering, the endurance of temptation, and the quiet mastery of self, merged with the soft, enduring love that had waited faithfully through time. Each heartbeat became a soft punctuation, each breath a lullaby of peace and completion, as the chamber, the home, and the presence of Penelope cocooned him in the gentle comfort of belonging. As night deepened further, Odysseus reflected on the entirety of his journey, the trials, the enchantments, the monsters, and the lessons of patience, observation, and endurance that had carried him through. Yet in this chamber, beside Penelope, those lessons found their soft, conclusive echo. Home was not merely a place, but a state of being nurtured by presence, love, and careful reflection. The soft cadence of conversation, the measured touch of hands, and the gentle flow of recognition and reassurance created a meditative rhythm, allowing years of wandering to dissolve into serenity. The room, infused with quiet warmth, seemed to hold the gentle weight of time, experience, and the enduring bond of husband and wife restored. Finally, Odysseus and Penelope rested together in the soft embrace of night. The long journey complete, the kingdom quietly secured, and the heart at peace. The slow rhythm of breath, the gentle hush of the chamber, and the soft glow of lamplight carried the promise of rest, reflection, and the enduring comfort of home. Years of wandering, enchantment, and trial had culminated in this serene moment, a meditation on patience, resilience, and the quiet power of enduring love. Ithaca, with its hills, shores, and hearths, now welcomed its king in tranquility, and Odysseus, at last beside Penelope, could finally surrender to the gentle lull of homecoming, carrying the soft, enduring lessons of his journey into the quiet folds of night.